All right, we are starting it live. It is processing now.
Okay, I will call to order the January 4th board meeting. Due to current conditions and mitigations placed on our region by the Illinois Department of Public Health and in accordance with guidance provided by the Governor's Office, the DuPage County Health Department, and Naperville 203's legal counsel, this meeting is being held virtually. Current Tier 2 resurgence mitigations require meetings to be limited to 10 individuals. Public comment is accepted electronically, and all comments received are posted in board docs under public comment. Since 5:30 p.m., the board has been in closed session to consider the following: the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district or legal counsel for the district; litigation, when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of the particular district has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal; and collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives. I will entertain a motion to come out of closed session.
So moved, Yang Roar.
Second, Gerke.
A motion and a second are heard. Please call the roll.
Leong,
Aye.
Yang Roar,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Gerke,
Aye.
Wanke,
Aye.
Kush,
Aye.
Kosminski.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Good evening and welcome to our January 4th board meeting. Our mission is to educate students to be self-directed learners, collaborative workers, complex thinkers, quality producers, and community contributors. Please call the roll, Mrs. Patton.
Board members present this evening: Kristen Fitzgerald, Donna Wanke, Charles Kush, Christine Gerke, Joe Kosminski, Paul Leong, and Janet Yang Roar.
Okay, please join the Board of Education in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have reached the point in our agenda for good news.
Seneca.
Wonderful. So to assist residents and community members with COVID prevention and containment, the DuPage County Health Department has made mask kits available to community organizations. We were lucky enough to receive 500 adult kits and 300 youth kits that our building social workers will be distributing to families. We're thankful for this partnership. And these are wonderful little kits. I'm not sure if you can see very well, but it has a mask and hand sanitizer. And with 800 kits to hand out, many in our community who may not have access will get those kits from us through the DuPage County Health Department. So we are very appreciative of them.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so we will go on in our agenda to public comment. The Board of Education welcomes comments from the public at its meetings. We regret that due to guidance received by our DuPage County Health Department, consistent with current mitigations limiting in-person professional meetings to 10 persons, we are meeting virtually and thus unable to receive public comment in person. However, all individuals who wish to submit a public comment are able to do so by email, as has been our practice at our virtual meetings during the pandemic. These emails are included as a part of the record of our meetings and can be accessed under public comment on our website. We will now read the public comments aloud. Individuals will be identified by first and last name. Comments by individuals shall be limited to 3 minutes. If an individual has submitted multiple public comment emails, they will be combined and limited to 3 minutes. When 3 minutes have been reached, Mrs. Patton will announce time, signifying that the 3 minutes have been reached. The complete comments will be included on our website as part of the public record of tonight's meeting. If a person is representing multiple individuals or a group, their public comment shall be limited to 5 minutes. All right, I believe we're ready for the emails to be read.
Wonderful, thank you. Our first message comes from Carmen Ceresa. She writes, "Dear tired, maligned, hardworking D203 board members, I write as a Naperville resident for 22 years, the parent of an immunocompromised D203 student and an employee of the district. Thank you for working so hard to keep us safe. Our children, teachers, and staff You have listened to angry tirades from exhausted parents and endured personal threats. A small group of parents is campaigning loudly to reopen schools. I understand their concerns. It's difficult to work when your children are home. Students with needs are having trouble. Many students are failing. Truly, there are no winners in this situation. However, these are not normal times. This is a global pandemic and the first in our lifetimes. Instead of worrying about students failing, can we give kudos to children who are surviving a global pandemic? Can we recognize the resilience of students and teachers who are doing their best? Even old teachers like me are learning more every day about how to engage students online. We are thinking outside the box, and many of our new skills will continue to be used once we return to in-person learning. Teachers want nothing more than to get back into the classroom, but we want to do it safely. Personally, I endured COVID-19 earlier this fall. Though mine was a minor case, it was terrifying. No one should have to expose themselves to this deadly virus if there's any other choice. And thanks to modern technology, there is another choice. We can teach online for a few more months. The board has walked a fine line in an attempt to placate all parties, and I respect and appreciate those monumental efforts. With the vaccine around the corner and teachers anticipating theirs in the second wave, I beg the board to hold their ground. We've made it this far. We can see the finish line. We need to stay the course. Thank you, Carmen Cerveza. Okay, our next one comes from Mary Beth Baskin. She writes, I would like Dan Bridges and the board to address why we are implementing a block hybrid schedule over the full day hybrid proposal we were presented with in July. I will remind you of what you, Dan, presented. 50% of students would attend in-person learning 3 days, 1 week for all 8 periods, and 2 days the following week. Why is this no longer a viable option? A block schedule at the high school level will create a day where a student will have 4 back-to-back 85-minute classes without any lunch period. They will either have lunch one day, on day 1, periods 1 through 4, or day 2, periods 5 through 8. So the day they do not have a lunch period, you are asking growing teenagers to not eat from 7:30 to 1:30 p.m. They will have back-to-back classes. There is no time to eat. Then you will ask them to perform on academic tests that will determine their future. How does this make any sense? Implementing the 2 or 3 days of in-person learning for all 8 periods has these benefits over the current half-day hybrid proposal. 1, full days increase a child's SEL, social emotional learning, and they need these connections. 2, full days will allow for a more normal school day and better support kids academically and support teachers. Teachers will not need to prepare a curriculum for an 85-minute class period, which is new for them, and they can utilize their lesson plans for a normal school day to keep their scheduled pacing throughout the semester. 3, since kids will be in person a portion of the week, the amount of time on a computer screen will be minimized. 4, after school time is available for students who need extra help. 5, full class days allow students time for lunch each day. It has already been communicated there will be designated areas for lunch assigned with the block hybrid schedule, so areas already have been determined to support eating in person. Again, this was your plan and it is much better suited to support our kids and teachers. Why are we walking away from it? If you do not adapt this, what is your solution for allowing kids to get nourishment and fuel in a block schedule for the days they do not have lunch? Our next message comes from Adam Russo. He writes, I'm encouraged by seeing the board make decisions to begin hybrid learning independent of the state metrics that have been so often spoken about. Having kids out of a classroom for 10 months is a very long time, and the irony isn't lost that while these decisions have been in the name of safety, kids have been put at risk socially, academically, and emotionally. I hope the board is prepared to pick up the pieces. I've always advocated that in-person learning should be a parent's choice. Parents didn't have that choice, and district children were forced to learn under a cookie-cutter approach in the name of safety. Much of the reason that I have favored parent choice for school is not only because different families need different things, but also because I do believe the kids and families have rights. It is pretty amazing how easily we've been able to discard these rights in the name of safety. I'm all for managing in-person school as safely as possible, but please be careful to not further stamp on the rights of the kids and families you have been elected, not volunteered to serve. Okay. The next message comes from Rick Rettmod. He writes, Dear Naperville 203 School Board, my name is Rick Rettmod, and I'm a Naperville taxpayer and a father of a 6th grader at Lincoln Junior High. I'm sure you will hear from many parents this evening who are sharing concerns about their children who have IEPs and have fallen behind, and whose parents are desperate to catch up, concerned about how this will impact their development, for the entirety of their academic careers. You'll hear from parents of high schoolers who are concerned about their child's ability to keep up with students who have not had the same interruptions once they arrive on college campuses. And while I have a tremendous amount of empathy for these parents and agree that those are highly important issues, I want to share with you a story of my own daughter. My daughter is a happy-go-lucky and active young lady who plays soccer, does dance, and is honors math and PI student. She has always loved school as much as any of her activities. In addition to following the goings-on of D203, I followed what happens with D204 because neither district can find themselves to make a decision as simple as a snow day without checking with the other. And when D204 announced a tentative plan to go back in some form of in-person learning, I chose not to tell my daughter. Well, because it isn't the district we attend. But I was hopeful. When the plan was laid out during the last D203 board meeting, I figured I'd try and provide my daughter with some glimmer of hope. Before I share my daughter's reaction, I have no idea why we aren't doing the original plan of a hybrid full-day school, which was first provided to us. But I'll concede to this step for what I feel is a false feeling of safety. As for my daughter's reaction, she broke down in tears and screamed, "They are lying to us. We aren't going back." So emotionally, the damage has been already done. I guess my daughter isn't the only one with the feelings of hopelessness. God forbid if she gets the rug pulled out from under her again in a couple of weeks. I give the district a pass on what transpired to conclude the 2019-2020 school year. We were operating without a net and without any precedent. But the fact that we've gone back and forth on waiting for a plan and then having a plan and then moving to a different plan for getting that plan pulled out from under us literally right before heading back to school has given me less and less confidence in the competence of the people charged with making decisions for the supposedly world-renowned school district. Schools all over the country are back in school, including those in our county and private schools in our community. Maybe if these decisions were made with a little more transparency, my confidence could be restored. And there are many decisions to be made in the near future. And while I have nothing but the utmost respect for the teachers of our children, I can't help but notice the rhetoric put forth by the leaders of many teachers' unions. It seems to me that from the union's perspective, the primary purpose of school is a place to employ adults as opposed to being a place to educate children. I hope the decisions you make in the future are with the children in mind. Okay, Bill and Heidi Aliyah write, "Dear Mr. Bridges and school board members, our 3 children have been accepted into Aurora Christian School beginning on 1/6/2021. Our children will be moving on this week forward and upward into a focused full-time and more importantly, safe in-person learning. While initially this was a difficult decision by and for the children, ultimately the lack of progress by District 203 leadership and the teachers union to address our children's needs forced us to find alternatives mid-year. Thankfully, the overwhelmingly scientific and empirical evidence of the health and safety of in-person learning, coupled with the ineffectiveness of remote learning, helped lessen the burden of such a difficult decision. Our children were willing to move out of state, splitting our family in half just so they could attend in-person school. We know other families who have had to do this as well. I had no idea that our junior at NCHS was having such a difficult time this year until the option of splitting our family was presented to her, and she had tears of relief in her eyes as she could see light at the end of the tunnel. This young lady works part-time job of her choosing, is an active figure skater, and actively participates at our church as a youth band leader. Yet she was willing to give all that up, including her friends and that she has known since she was in kindergarten, just to be in school with her teachers. Our freshman with anxiety and ADHD has cried in frustration most days of the week, and her grades have suffered greatly, even with extra help from her teachers. She is very nervous about transferring schools and not being with her peers that she has also known since kindergarten, but she's more relieved to be sitting in a classroom. Our 4th grader loves his school so much that he was adamant he would not leave when we discussed options moving out of state versus homeschool versus private school. On our first school tour, when he saw kids sitting at desks in classrooms and kids playing on the playground, he had immediately changed his mind. Our son has a physical disability and previously had a brain tumor removed. He had severely delayed learning when he first joined CUSD 203 at Ann Reed, and Ann Reed started a journey with our schools that has nothing short of miraculous. Our son learned to walk independently, socialized successfully with his peers, and even caught up to above grade level in reading by the end of 3rd grade, all because of the love and dedication of his teachers, team, and staff at Ann Reed and Scott School. Since March, when remote learning essentially began, he has had several crying fits lasting 1.5 to 2 hours, as remote learning has been so difficult for him to manage with his disability. Our son has been through terrible times, but remote learning has left him feeling alone and emotionally insecure. His team has tried their best to make it easier, but the heavy use of technology has been excessively cumbersome for him to manage. Even though our son will receive little in the ways of support at Aurora Christian, he very enthusiastically agreed to transfer once his acceptance letter arrived, and he has already packed his backpack for his first day of school. While we are beyond disappointed and quite angry with the decisions your leadership has made, we are thankful to the prior dedication and support of our children's teachers and administrators over these past many years. We pray the district leadership finds the faith and courage to return to full in-person learning for the collective benefit of all children.
Time.
Okay, the remainder of that message is included in board. Okay, Melinda and Christopher Wong wrote the next message. Please share with board members during the January 4th meeting as public comments. We have 4 children in the 203 school district, and 2 of them have IEPs and 2 are kindergarten students. We first want to thank the board for listening and taking the care and commitment to their appointments seriously. None of you envisioned the stress, time, and tension this year would take on our families and teachers and administration. As many parents, we were shocked that the administration went fully remote learning this fall after months of developing a good mitigation strategy and receiving a 78% support for in-person learning. No students could meet their teachers. Our oldest 6th grade daughter with an IEP has met her LBS teacher only once when she went in for testing one morning for 2 hours. As the full remote has moved now into a second semester, the delusionment, depression, and anger are mounting from parents, teachers, and students. This is why we thought it important to share our story of in-person support. One voice doesn't always make a difference, but one voice can still be heard. After 47 days, numerous emails, Zoom conferences, and phone calls, my son with an IEP who was failing on Zoom finally was invited to come to school for 2 mornings with his LBS teacher. I cannot tell you the difference in his demeanor, drive, and attention that drastically changed as a result. A 3rd day was soon added. The commitment of his teachers and the Elmwood administration is commendable. We have felt their support from the very beginning and also how tied down their hands were by this administration. Children should not be invited to school for only 2 mornings a week, especially those with cognitive learning issues. Zoom and learning at home is the worst scenario for this child, and it was finally addressed. I want to personally thank the administration and his teachers at Elmwood who took the time to hear, act, and teach my son. Another of our children has only verbally participated a handful of times in Zoom meetings with his class because he is embarrassed to share via video. He has now been invited 1 morning a week for in-person teaching. Both kids call it real school. Zoom is no way to teach children how to cognitively learn, and technology should only be used as a supplement at best, not as the primary means for instruction. No good teacher would argue this point. We have heard for months now that the intention is to move to in-person learning for a majority of the students. We implore you, based on our experience and seeing the difference that even a minor amount of in-person instruction has changed the trajectory of our son's learning. We challenge this board to stand strong and avoid fear, set the best example, trajectory, and mitigation strategies that are possible to ensure all students, not just IEP or special students, get prioritized, but all students get prioritized. We encourage you to aggressively progress forward to lessen the learning gap that has already taken place at other schools in Naperville and surrounding Illinois suburbs are open 5 days a week with full in-person instruction. Hybrid learning should only be the start to full 5-day in-person learning. Years from now, will we tell our kids we fought for them or we allowed them to be isolated prisoners in their rooms during what we are now calling school? 203 school district is better than this. We need to step up and stand strong together again. Thank you. Okay, our next message comes from Keith Carlson. Please find attached a letter regarding agenda item 8.03 for tonight's Board of Education meeting. It is not critical to me that any of the letter be read out loud during the meeting when our community can simply read it if it's posted. Rather, the letter is intended to provide the board with additional perspective as they discuss this policy before it is voted on in a few weeks. And I did correspond with Mr. Carlson, and he said just to put it into board docs. And so that is there for everyone to read. Okay. The next message comes from Taryn Polycandriotis. She writes, Dear Superintendent Bridges and the D203 Board of Education, as a teacher in D203, I want to thank you for putting safety first throughout the course of this pandemic. However, as we approach the date for implementing hybrid learning, I'm extremely nervous. In November, the message went out that we would not move to hybrid learning until community transmission was back down to moderate or below. Since Christmas, the positivity rate in DuPage County has been climbing 9.8% as of 12/31. Transmission remains substantial, and yet we are discussing returning to in-person learning. How is it safe to put students and teachers back in the buildings now with substantial transmission? But it wasn't safe in November when the announcement was made. I understand that the positivity rate is lower than it was in November, but it is still high and climbing. In addition, the new, more infectious variant of the virus has now been identified in the United States. It is infecting more people more quickly, and the rate of children being infected with this variant is higher as well. While that doesn't make it more deadly, all one has to do is look at the story of the 18-year-old girl in Tinley Park with no pre-existing conditions who died of the virus less than a week after being diagnosed over the holidays. We cannot, in good conscience, send students and teachers back to the buildings right now. The argument has been made that our mitigation strategies are working and the virus isn't spreading in schools, but right now our main strategy has been severely limiting the amount of people in the buildings. Of course, if it isn't spreading, if there isn't anyone there, it isn't spreading if there isn't anyone there. There will undoubtedly, that will undoubtedly change, if we force students and teachers back to in-person learning. I'm a teacher, I want to teach, contrary to public opinion. I am not sitting around at home being lazy and enjoying collecting a paycheck for doing nothing. I've worked harder and experienced extreme stress this year to adapt a curriculum to full remote learning than I normally would have to do in order to teach in person. No one wants to be back in person more than the teachers do. This isn't what we signed up for and we don't like it, but I don't want to see students fall ill. I don't want to put myself and my family at risk when we are so close to obtaining vaccines for all. This return to learn needs to be put on hold until transmission is once again at least moderate or low, and or all teachers and staff and hopefully students have the opportunity to be vaccinated against this deadly disease. Okay. Our next message comes from Matthew Ewald. He writes, "Good evening. I'm writing as we close in on the 10-month mark of no in-person instruction. Just take a few minutes to think about the last 10 months and as a board member ask yourself the following questions. Has the administration followed the mission statement you read at the beginning of each meeting? Has the administration acted in the best interests of students? Has the administration acted in the best interests of taxpayers? Has the administration shown leadership and communicated a clear vision on a plan to return students to the classroom? At every meeting, we hear the board president state no response was made to comments during the meeting and that the superintendent will respond for the board. So I look forward to your responses to these questions. Please get our schools open. Thank you." Scott Person is our next message. "My name is Scott Person and I have a 7th grader at Lincoln and a 2nd grader at Prairie. As I maneuver through our changed landscape of life, and I've come to the realization that we can do this, we can live life that way, the way we were meant to, and do so in a safe manner. I run an office and responsible for over 70 individuals that enter the building in a safe manner on a daily basis. I have traveled on a plane, I regularly shop at a grocery store, and shockingly ate at restaurants. Our society has adjusted over our lifestyle and doing it in a safe manner. From my vantage point, I believe the kids are safer than most individuals. The one place that hasn't adjusted is our schools, because the school board lives in fear of what ifs. We can do this. You need to give more credit to our principals, teachers, and more importantly, our students, that they know how to do this in a safe manner. Will there be bumps in the road? For sure. But we can't deprive our kids' childhood and social development, mental health, and education based on fear and what ifs. The damage you continue to do by keeping kids out of school is going to have a long-term effect. Stop looking at what the number of cases are today or last week and start looking at the long-term effects that it's going to have on our children and the district as a whole. This is a long-term problem, and I'm not hearing solutions on how to repair that damage that is being done to our kids' development. Instead of living in what-if game of what would go wrong, let's change our mindset of what if it works. This isn't a leap of faith, as many districts locally are back in person, private schools, and nationally it is being done. What if we can actually make this happen? What if the kids get healthy social interaction with their peers? What if students have the ability to truly connect with their teachers? What if students with IEPs and need additional services actually get the help they are legally required to get and do it in person? What if our student athletes, band, and other extracurricular activities get the opportunity to perform and do what they love most? We have so much negativity around us. We have so much confrontation among us. I'm guilty as well. But how about we have an open dialogue of what if we get these kids back and actually get them back in school? It is being done all around us, so I don't want to hear about cases and phases and surges. Let's get a plan we can execute and get to work to make it happen. Okay, Ann Cedor. Happy New Year. I am writing to advocate for the safe and efficient return to in-person learning for any family that desires it. Our kids have to sacrifice more than is fair. With the current metrics on a downward trend, I believe it is possible to have a safe transition for all students back into the buildings. My youngest has been successfully back in for the portion of the school day as he is in a specialized classroom. He wears his mask as directed, is able to follow protocols in place, And I'm confident that if he slips up, his team of brilliant and kind educators is able to quickly get him back on track without risk to anyone. Without a doubt, if he has been able to manage this transition, I know the rest of our students can as well. Let's celebrate those teachers, therapists, administrators, assistants, and students who have been the pioneers in District 203 Return to Learn, and build on that success for everyone else. Our kids deserve to be back in person learning like so many others in the country. Thank you for the hard work and tough decisions you have had to make, and please now make the decision to push forward with the Return to Learn on January 25th. Okay, Sarah Forrester is our next message. My comments tonight concern community engagement in 2021 academic goals. 1, regarding engagement, the website links to the 2020 meeting agendas were recently broken. They only connect to tonight's meeting. Public comments aren't included in meeting minutes. All agendas need to be accessible for public review. No one from the administration has contacted me or other previous commenters to acknowledge or respond to our comments. If the 203 FAQ page includes responses, commenters should be emailed with any clarifications of any issues addressed in the FAQ. Also, it is a matter of integrity that each commenting student receives a personal phone call from staff and board members. If authorized by the board to acquire parent feedback, any committees, including members of the administration, school principals, and home and school presidents, may be subject to the Open Meetings Act. Agendas and minutes for such meetings must be published. Please reconsider this plan, as home and school presidents do not represent the parent community at large. It is inappropriate to put effectively unelected home and school volunteers at the center of the 10-month-old closed school controversy. Tier 3 mitigation allows 50 people in a school board meeting, so end the virtual meetings. Number 2, regarding the 2021 academic goals, District 203 is expected to measure academic achievement via specific tools. In 2019, schools assessed but hadn't yet met the goals. In 2020, schools never finished assessment. The only acceptable means to demonstrate a continued commitment to the 2021 goals is for every school to administer the NWEA MAP, SAT, and IAR test no later than May 31st, 2021. 90% of District 203 funding is local. Statewide, only 66% of school districts is local. Since the local community funds almost all of District 203 expenses, local input regarding 2021 academic achievement goals, including need for assessments, is reasonable. Tell the community how achievement goals based on 10 months of school closures have been reduced. Regardless of lowered expectations, assessments are needed to discern current status and plan recovery. If District 203 wishes to reduce the burden of public engagement and recovery, it must reopen the schools and assess its students. Meanwhile, the staff and board needs to personally respond to every parent and student providing public comment and hold meetings in person. Finally, any appointment of school board members to fill an open board seat should consider current community dynamics and refrain from traditional political bias applied in selecting interim board members. Thank you for your consideration. Okay, our next message comes from Ella King. On behalf of TEAMS, a newly formed student-driven volunteer organization that stands for To Empower All Minority Students, devoted to the promotion of community coordination, collaboration, unity, and engagement across all area districts, we welcome all who support our positive, inspirational, and empowering mission. We have several statements from Naperville School District 203 students detailing feedback and recommendations regarding online learning structures. We hope to share our unique perspective through collaboration with groups such as SFCP, Home and School, Student Government, as well as Diversity and Inclusion Leadership. We look forward to offering a view parents and adult administrators may not fully understand. And again, look forward to your guidance on the next steps and or hopeful meeting setup. Thank you. Kindly, respectfully in advance, Ella King. Okay. Gracie Libby writes, hi, I know I've sent several public comments in the last 6 months. Here are just a few key points I'd like to address today. 1, extended school year. There is ample evidence suggesting that there will be large losses in academic achievement for students as a result of COVID-19 related school closures. When students spend significant time out of school over the summer, it is called summer slide. We have participated in ESY to combat that for the past 2 years with our daughter. I would like to hear the district summer school plan to address summer slide, COVID slide for all students. Summer could provide time to deliver additional support in person for students that could ease some of the challenges of this crisis. I hope the district will show creativity and innovation. There is a strong case for offering summer learning programs for more students if budget allows, and the district should at least consider making extended school year services available to more students with disabilities through IEPs. Given the burnout that most families are already feeling while online learning, please ensure a robust in-person plan is in the pipeline for this summer. 2, board appointment. I ask that the board consider the number of families who chose in-person learning in every survey this year and put aside bias when choosing a replacement for Miss Yang seat. Please choose a replacement sympathetic to the overwhelming majority of families who desire parent choice for their children's learning experience and with a plan for recovery of this past year. Please make this process as transparent as possible to help regain trust that has eroded this year. 3, fully reopen elementary and EC. While we do have one child in the district, we also withdrew 2 other children from 203 Elementary School due to our experience with remote learning. We look forward to the reopening of schools and strongly request that full-time daily in-person learning be the goal and the benchmark expectation for the rest of the school year, like so many of our neighbor county schools are achieving. Please move swiftly with a plan to move from hybrid to full-time. Please allow IEP students at Ann Reed to return to 5 days of in-person learning. We are so thankful for the plan to go to 4 days a week in the coming weeks, but feel that a 5th day would be so helpful to make up gains for so much time that has been lost due to district action. Thank you specifically to Ms. Fitzgerald, who spoke to me during the Christmas break regarding the many concerns I've had over this school year. I appreciate your commitment to our children. In short, I felt heard. I will continue to advocate for our children and look forward to some robust conversations about the district plan. Kind regards, Gracie Libby. Okay. Our next message is Katie Cazzoni. I'm commenting today to plead with the board and superintendent to proceed with the plan to put elementary students in the classroom starting January 25th. In-person learning should be treated as an essential service. Elementary students need to be present in the classroom to get the full benefit of schooling. As you know, the DuPage County Health Department encourages officials to use their discretion to determine which students receive in-person instruction. I'm telling you today that the time is long past for all elementary students to be part of that population. Teachers and students are doing their best, but it's not enough. My normally good students struggle to pay attention. Remote learning for 9 long months is not an acceptable solution. I am encouraged to see that the most recently reported information for the D203 community positivity rate is low moderate, and I would urge the board to focus on this. However, I am very concerned that the board will instead focus on the substantial amount of new cases per day, and my children will be forced to be out of the classroom for nearly a year. This is unacceptable, especially for the youngest students in our district. There is no evidence that the positivity rate or transmission rates in communities where students are in person are any worse than those where students are 100% virtual. If my student risk is the same inside or outside the classroom, then I'd rather be given the choice to put them in the classroom. At this point, there are too many examples of other districts successfully implementing in-person learning to name. It baffles me that D203 is still not wanting to provide that same learning environment. Okay. Our next message comes from Amanda Malarkey. She actually sent in 2 that have been combined. Good evening. The kindergarten parents in the district have been talking, and we are really concerned about our kids. One thing that came up a few times is that parents feel stuck. Their children aren't learning, and they're developing physical and emotional problems from the stress of staring at and attending to a screen all day. There are parents who would like to unenroll their kids and start kindergarten over next year. However, some principals are telling parents that they cannot unenroll their student now and have them repeat kindergarten. They would have to start 1st grade next year. Other principals are letting kids have the option to redo kindergarten next year if their parents unenroll them from the program. What is the district's position? If it is a building decision, then who would we talk to about making it consistent across schools? Kindergartners are being disproportionately impacted by the remote learning, and families need options to help their children. Thank you. And then her second message is, according to the Illinois report card, in 2019, only 68% of the students in Naperville 203 were proficient in English language arts, ELA. This was before 10 months of lockdown and remote learning. As administrators report on their school improvement plans for the next year, and as they choose professional development opportunities for teachers, I would encourage them to explore the science of reading and structural literacy. It is an evidence-based framework for teaching that will better meet the needs of all students, and in doing so, help close the achievement gaps for students of color, students with disabilities, students from low-income households, and students who move to District 203 and lack the foundational skills in reading, writing, and spelling. From the Connecticut chapter of Decoding Dyslexia, there is a concern that the disparity and gaps in education will only increase in students as a result of the pandemic due to factors including inconsistent time in a classroom, limited access to technology, delays in identification, and difficulties obtaining direct and appropriate instruction with online learning. There is evidence from the National Reading Panel in 2000 that directed explicit instruction helps develop better readers. We know the whole language and balanced literacy is not a systemic instruction. Systematic methods of instruction, including phonics, phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, is the path forward. Phonics and direct instruction is universally important for children of all backgrounds who benefit from being taught directly how to break down words and how letters represent sounds. What we do is who we are, and we need national change in the way we teach reading and prepare our teachers in the United States. Implementation of structured literacy and teacher training is the science of reading would be impactful for generations to come. Structured literacy is critical for the 20% of the population with dyslexia. However, it is effective in shrinking the achievement gap for all children. According to the Iowa Reading Research Center, a structured literacy approach is best because it avoids making potentially erroneous assumptions about what students are naturally capable of implicitly learning. By explicitly teaching all concepts, students who read internalize the patterns of language will learn quickly and easily, and those who otherwise may struggle will get the instruction they need for success. Moreover, these
Time.
all right, and the rest of this public comment is in board docs, and that concludes our messages.
Okay, thank you very much. On behalf of the whole board, we want to thank all of those who submitted public comments by email or have contacted the Board of Education. Reading your comments is a vital part of understanding the challenging issues faced by our community. Due to the volume of email, there are times when we are unable to respond in a timely way. However, all emails are read and valued greatly by the Board of Education. Issues raised in public comment will be taken under advisement by the Board of Education, but will not be discussed this evening. Issues raised during public participation may be added to future agendas or addressed by administrative staff. The superintendent is the board's designee to coordinate response to public comment and will apprise the board accordingly. As has been communicated by our superintendent, answers to questions raised in public comment will be posted on our website under frequently asked questions. This will conclude our public comment period. Okay, and so we will go now to item 6.01, action by consent, adoption of personnel report. I will entertain a motion to consider the consent agenda.
I, Donna Wanke, motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Second.
A motion and a second are heard. Please call the roll, Mrs. Patton.
Kush,
Aye.
Leong,
Aye.
Yangror,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Wanke,
Aye.
Kuzminski,
Aye.
Gerke.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. So we will go now on our agenda to item 7, communications. We will start with item 7.01, superintendent staff school report.
Good evening, thank you. And we will begin with an update on the return to learn. I'll just make a comment for members of the community. Loaded in board docs is the presentation that we'd like to have pulled up right now, please, as well as a memo to the Board of Education discussing metrics and a table that we'll be using. The December 21st, 2020 board meeting, the district administration presented a plan to transition to hybrid learning stage 3 of our return to learn plan beginning January 25th. To our community, if you missed that presentation, you can find it on the 203 Return to Learn website. Tonight, we're going to focus our comments on current metrics and how we consider them moving forward. So this evening, district administration is going to update the Board of Education community on implementation of our Return to Learn plan. Next slide, please. And one more to the goals. One more. Okay, again, we're going to continue to update and adjust our plan. Our return to learn goals are going to remain consistent. As educators, we recognize the great need to get students back in-person learning, and therefore we had committed to 2 goals for our work. First was develop a plan that can be responsive to the changes in safety and health needs created by the pandemic, but also focused on returning to in-person learning. We focused on returning all students to in-person instruction and creating an academic and social emotional conditions to promote continuing their education. This slide again is familiar to the board and to the members of our community, and it illustrates our 4 stages of our return to learn plan. And as I indicated in my opening comments at the December 21st meeting, we presented to the Board of Education and the community our plan to transition from stage 2 into stage 3, our hybrid learning. We expect to transition to stage 3 in the coming weeks and begin hybrid learning beginning the week of January 25th. Yes, Dr. Igo to now speak to our evaluation criteria.
As I shared at the last board meeting, we're making a shift in the evaluation criteria from what was recommended by the health department in the fall, primarily monitoring community spread, to now focusing on consistent and correct use of mitigation strategies in each school, using our District 203 community data to determine our community spread, tracking our ability to contact trace when there are close contacts within our schools, staff availability, and PPE supply. These changes are aligned to the recommendations from the CDC and support the additional information we have learned since August. This chart represents how we will use those new metrics to guide our decisions about in-person instruction. As we have said in the past, there is not one indicator that will determine if and when an adaptive pause is necessary. How all of the metrics come together informs our decisions about being able to provide in-person instruction with a limited amount of risk for spreading the virus within our schools. As we prepare for the transition into the hybrid learning model on January 25th, we've identified where the current metrics are. Our community positivity rate falls within that moderate range. We continue to have an adequate supply of PPE and cleaning supplies. The students who have been coming for in-person instruction have been following our face mask and social distancing mitigation strategies. We have been able to notify 95% or more of close contacts within the 24-hour period. We do not have evidence to suggest that there's been transmission of the virus in the 2 weeks prior to the winter break within the schools, and our staffing levels are continuing to be sufficient. We have not yet begun the COVID screening testing, so there's not any current metrics on that data.
In partnership with Safeguard Screening LLC, Naperville 203 is planning a pending board action on offering weekly screening tests for COVID-19 to all staff and secondary level students. The goal of the program is early identification of potential COVID cases so that we can reduce transmission of the virus in quarantines due to close contacts, especially from asymptomatic individuals. Ultimately, we believe this mitigation strategy will allow us to begin the hybrid learning model. This voluntary program will provide an additional mitigation strategy to complement the others already in place. The saliva-based test will be administered once a week and will screen for high viral loads of the COVID-19 virus. Safeguard Screening LLC will provide results to the district within 24 hours, and individuals with a clinical finding will be notified of the next steps. The test does not make a diagnosis, but identifies individuals who need to seek a PCR COVID-19 test. The test is extremely accurate, with 99.9% of clinical findings resulting in a positive COVID-19 test. Later on this evening's agenda, we'll be asking for board approval to enter in an agreement with Safeguard. We'll discuss COVID testing more at that item as well.
All of our mitigation strategies are important and work together to slow the spread of the virus within our schools. Additional information about how we will be implementing those strategies can be found on the Return to Learn page of our website. The Return to Learn guide identifies all of the strategies we will be using, and then there are videos provided that provide you an opportunity to see what those strategies will look like when they're in action.
Okay, again, our next steps, consistent with our December 21st presentation, is that new students, kindergarten, 6th and 9th grade students, those in transition grades, will be contacted to participate in transition activities. Those may vary based on school and by level. Communication will come from those schools. We'll continue to work with Safeguard in terms of planning our COVID screening test, protocols, and procedures. And district-wide reminders will be provided to students and families about key mitigation strategies via website updates, Talk 203 messages, and social media. The community will continue to be updated about our Return to Learn plan via our Talk 203 system, social media outlets, as well as website updates at naperville203.org/return to learn. COVID-19 dashboard is updated weekly, and the frequently asked questions after each board meeting as well. Throughout the coming weeks, we'll be sending many reminders about our health and safety protocols in preparation for transition to in-person learning. As stated at the beginning of this presentation, our ultimate goal has been for all students and staff to return to full in-person learning. Our number one commitment is to keep all people in our organization safe and healthy while modeling and staying grounded in our district mission. We are excited and looking forward to the coming days and weeks and welcoming more of our students back to in-person learning. And with that, members of the administration would be happy to answer questions from members of the board.
Okay, I want to thank our administrative team for the Return to Learn presentation. Our community has expressed many questions and concerns during our public comments. Some of these have been answered in our presentation and some will be addressed by the Board of Education's questions. However, as a reminder, our superintendent will also address these questions if we ask questions on our website. So many of our community members have also sent questions to the Board of Education by email, and I want to thank our community for their efforts to express their comments and concerns. This is a vital part of ensuring that the concerns are addressed. As a reminder to our community about our own Board of Education process, the board submits many questions ahead of the presentation so that answers to questions from the community can be addressed as a part of the presentation. We also reflect many of these questions during our question and answer period. We will now begin the board's question and answer period. Who would like to go first? Joe.
Yeah, thank you for that update. It's good to say that we'll be able to do some COVID testing within the district. I have a couple of questions about the process. It sounds like it's a voluntary process. So are there concerns about a self-selection bias in the population that we might not actually be able to get a good handle on the actual rates within the district?
Christine, you want to start? Or again, it's just a reminder, this isn't surveillance testing, not diagnostic. So the intent is to really just kind of, use it as an additional mitigation strategy to help us, especially identify those asymptomatic individuals. So, Christine?
Yeah, I think that exactly what Mr. Bridges just said, and thinking in terms of, it's more about the number of people that we're testing and making sure we're getting good samples kind of going that way as well, to make sure that we're catching. But I have, again, it's all new to us, and I think, but as we've talked with other districts that are implementing that has not been something that they've identified as an area of concern.
Okay, and it sounds like the false positive rate is quite low, less than 1%, if I understood the presentation correctly. Is there any data on false negative rates, which is actually a little bit more concerning, I think, than a false positive rate?
There definitely was some information on that. I'd have to go back to pull the exact. Of course, there's always no matter what test we give, that's always a possibility. Even when you take something like a strep test, that's a possibility. But the way that this test works is it goes for very high viral loads of the virus, so it's less likely to do that. So I'd have to get back to you specifically on what that number is, but it is also very low.
Thank you. I'll let somebody else go.
Charles.
It helps if I unmute. Just to build on Joe's question. So the testing is voluntary, and we're using it as an additional mitigation strategy. What level of voluntary, participation would we need to be able to see in order for it to help us provide an extra layer of mitigation? If only one or two, I'm just going to go in extreme direction. If only one or two people voluntarily take the test, that's not really going to give us much information. What kind of thresholds do we need in order to hit? I think it's important for the community to understand what level of volunteer participation we're going to need to help it to get some good information.
So we've set that limit at 70% of the people or the staff and students who are participating in in-person instruction. Now that seems to be the level that other districts have had success at. We'll have to monitor that if we don't feel like we're getting enough information to make the decisions that we want. If we want to ask for more or explain and go after more, but we believe that 70% is a good threshold for us.
Yeah, so I would add into that again to members of the community. I would, and our staff as well, encourage you to opt in as this additional mitigation strategies, so that it can help us, be ahead of any sort of potential spread within our schools as we bring more individuals into our buildings. the more participation we have in this, the better. And so again, some of the specific logistics regarding how we'll do this, we'll be working with some of our building administrators at the secondary level for the students. One of the things about it, we will be one of the larger districts that Safeguard is working with. And so this won't be like a once a week testing type of thing, one day of the week. We'll likely have to spread this over multiple days, perhaps all 5 days of the week, to ensure that, they're able to meet our load need.
And kind of a question on the other side of it, what is in terms of maintaining, confidentiality, et cetera, what is the lower limit in terms of level of participation before we'll be able to see some level of report out? I know if too few people are participating, that could also present a problem in terms of even looking at the data, or I'm assuming that. Can you just check that assumption for me?
Yeah, so the information that we would share with the company does not identify an individual in any way, shape, or form. We'll probably have to use what we've always used in terms of we need at least 10 individuals, right, for us to be able to report back out. I highly anticipate that won't be a problem for us moving forward.
And again, I just say a reminder, this is not diagnostic testing, so we won't be reporting positives or anything like a clinical possibility that refers for the PCR test.
Right. No, understood. I understood that it wasn't diagnostic testing. It's just kind of a viral load thing. I just think it's important for us to continue to convey exactly what you said, because without that level of understanding, it could be misconstrued. So thank you for that explanation. I'll yield.
Paul.
I'm thrilled you're finally putting together some testing, and I think it's a great program. My question is that how will your test be affected by individuals who might have received a vaccine?
That's a good question, Mr. Long. We can ask the doctor. I don't know, Christine, if you have an answer, we can get that confirmed by the company. What I call with the health department today, though, still, even those with vaccines who have received a vaccine, if they are a close contact, they still would have to go through same quarantining procedures right now, according to the health department. So, Christine, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think we definitely, that's something we need to kind of continue to ask the company about. But I would remind everyone that we aren't going to give vaccines to anybody under the age of 16. So it's going to impact a small number of our students that we would be testing.
Thank you.
That would.
Donna.
So I have a follow-up on that. I know that we're not, I understand what you said, Christine, about not students are getting vaccines, but some of our students have probably already experienced exposure and maybe have immunity to COVID. So have we, one thing that we haven't discussed in a board meeting is how are we addressing quarantining of students who have already tested or, have a positive test and have already had the COVID, and now I know we don't know how long they're immune, but how are we addressing that with them? Are they required to quarantine as long, or what's the protocol? We never talked about that.
Yeah, that's a very specific question, and I'm just going to let Christine talk as well. But based on my conversations with the health department right now, in terms of how they're treating it, again, especially individuals who may have the vaccine, or if they're a close contact, they're a close contact, and they'd be treated the same. Christine, is that your understanding?
There is some specific guidance that we get in regards to 90 days. I have yet to have anybody that I've really played that all the way out with, but there is some guidance around that. I can certainly get back to you on exactly what that guidance is.
Okay, thank you.
Within 90 days of having had COVID.
Right. I just didn't really think about that until we were talking about the people who've been vaccinated. And then I realized that we're going to have people who have had the disease. So it'd be important to know how we're going to work through that. I'm not sure if other people had questions. That piggybacked off of Paul's, so I wanted to make sure I got it in right away. I do have further questions, but I'll let somebody else go if that's helpful.
I don't see any other hands, so I would say go ahead and do your three, and then we can continue on.
Okay. So I know that later in today's board meeting, we're talking about school improvement plans, but this is more COVID related in the sense that we haven't done testing for our students yet in regards to like what, and I thought we had that last meeting, but then I went back and looked for it and I couldn't find it. So what is our schedule for what testing we'll do as students return to school?
Dr. Knowlton?
Sure. We are anxious to, as students return to school through hybrid after the week of the 25th, as soon as students are in a place of adjusting to being in school, the routine, the interactions, just sort of the course of the day, we're anxious to go ahead and administer NWA MAP growth in reading and math to kids in all grades K-8. And then I know that the same thing would happen with learning strategies gold at the early childhood level as well. We have the option to administer that assessment, not learning strategies gold, but NWA MAP growth to students as needed at the high school level as well if staff have concerns about specific students. So that's probably the foremost assessment. We don't want to rush that. We want to do that at a time when we know kids will be able to show us what they're able to do. And then as far as we're concerned, we're proceeding with the scheduled accountability assessments, the IAR, Illinois Assessment of Readiness, the Illinois Science Assessment, the SAT suite. Those from a state perspective are all on course, and the expectation continues to be that we will administer those within a window that starts at the earliest March 15th.
Okay, thank you for that. And then when can we expect to see, I know that our students who were supposed to take the SAT last spring were delayed in taking that until the fall. So when can we expect to see the testing results from that and the PSAT?
I can address both of those. The SAT that was administered to current seniors in September, it was actually September 23rd. Those would have been juniors that would have taken it in April during their junior year. We took a look at the results of that student body as a whole relative to other junior classes. And we did not see any difference in the average SAT score between the seniors that just took it this September and the juniors that last took it, which would have been April 19th. So no significant overall average total score difference, nothing in ELA or what's called evidence-based reading and writing. We did see an average of a 3 percentile rank point decline in mathematics, possibly, likely, educationally not significant. That finding has been noted nationally. We're seeing that the pandemic has resulted in more slide relative to math achievement than reading achievement. But again, it's not something, overall, it's quite positive if you consider we're looking at students that took the test in September after they had not participated in person since the previous mid-March. So the results of that weren't cataclysmic. We have the PSAT and MSQT results for, I'm going to say, around 90% of students. We're waiting. I know this seems like it takes an eternity. We gave that test in October. I think it was around the 14th. The vast majority of kids that take the PSAT and MSQT under standard conditions can be scored very quickly. We have a certain proportion of students that take the test with accommodations. That requires more time to produce results through the Educational Testing Service, or ETS arm of SAT. So once we've got all the data, we'll take a look at the PSAT this fall relative to prior falls and do a similar analysis.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
My other questions were similar to what board members were asking about the surveillance testing. But when, and maybe you said this and I was taking notes, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but when can our parents expect more information on how that works and the protocols? And I know somewhere along the line we talked about possibly another video, but I see that the videos, the return to learn videos, are the ones that I've already seen, the 4. So is there going to be a video on the?
Seneca, do you want to talk a little bit to our communication plan regarding this, and then I'll add a few things?
Yeah, absolutely. We will be pushing out all those videos again over the next few weeks as we prepare. We also have a contact tracing video that we're finalizing right now. And I know Christine and I are in the beginning talks of how that testing is going to work, and a video on that as well. So all kind of we held the contact tracing through the holidays, but we are really going to push it on social media and talk to 3 messages to really get everyone ready and prepared and kind of awake to the fact that they're coming back in and what steps they need to take.
So in the coming days, we'll also be working with some of our building staff to operationalize exactly how this will be done. With the exact logistics would look like, how many students. So we're still working with the company in terms of other communication from them this morning. That's where I mentioned that 5 days. Just again, depending on the size of our opt-in and the number of tests that we're producing every day, how often it's going to work. So it'll be real time. We also have to have a small pilot with the company to ensure that they are able to read barcodes or non-personally identifying, things so that they can read them, so that we have accurate information there. So we will again be communicating that as soon as we have it developed.
Great, thank you for that. I had one more. I can't. I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I see Paul's hand.
I have a follow-up question on the academic assessment testing, not COVID testing. I heard that we might be having some additional testing as soon as March of 2021 for remote students.
We are, our plan is to invite all students to participate in whether it's internal assessments, like for example, the NWA MAP growth, reading or math. Our intention is to invite all students to participate in that testing. So if a student is a hybrid student, they would participate during the natural course of a day of attendance. If a student's a remote student, all of our schools are prepared to invite those students to participate under conditions of obviously safety and hygiene, and all the conditions that we, that we would impose on students as they attend staff and students attend schools. So of course, a parent has a right and could choose not to participate in that. As far as accountability assessment goes, we're working with the state in terms of understanding how we report parents that essentially there's not a formal opt-out procedure. So I don't want people to hear, oh, I can opt out of this stuff. There's no opting out. But if a parent decides under no circumstances or conditions do I wish my child to participate, we're working with ISB on how to account for that, how to record that, how to communicate that, but then also how to get at a place where we're not held, where that's something that's out of our control. And we want to make sure that the state understands that we don't want to be, dinged for that. So we will do everything we can to accommodate students' participation. We want everyone to participate. You know how this goes. If we don't have at least 95%, you just don't have the confidence that it really reflects, a sense of the total student population. So as in other years, our target is 95%.
Thank you. It sounds like you have a good plan in place and you're covering many bases.
Thank you.
Janet.
Hi, thanks. With surveillance testing, looking through the FAQs, it looks like we are focused on secondary school students and staff. Can I ask, with regards to staff, are we making the test available to other?
To all staff.
levels? Oh, okay, all staff. Will that include the after-school programs and our partners there?
Like childcare, is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yes, that's what I meant.
We'll have to discuss that with legal counsel in terms of providing that with them. I don't know that it would be a problem, but we could look into that.
Okay. And I know we omitted elementary school because they're a little bit more self-contained, but in 4th and 5th grades, there is a little bit more mixing with math and language arts, right? I just wonder if it does make sense to include them as well within the program.
Christine.
I think that's certainly something we can certainly have some conversation about, but I think the information that we've gathered so far, in particular, talking with some of those elementary districts that are doing this, is that it's not really students that come back in the positive, it's really, they see the adults. And so by giving that option to our staff members, we're providing that kind of level of mitigation for our students. But if we start to see something that's happening in transmission, it's certainly something we can come back and consider.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any hands right yet. Charles, did you have one round? I think you had one round, right? So I'll go quickly and then I'll come back to you. Okay. So I want to thank you for putting forward the testing. I know that our health department was initially not as welcoming to this idea, but I know we've gotten so many questions about how people have gone back safely. And for example, looking at foreign countries, for example, who have been able to go back safely. I know that testing has been a big part of their ability to mitigate their risks. So I'm very appreciative that we pushed forward with this. As a parent, I'm thinking like what questions I would have, and I'm wondering, can you kind of walk us through, and you may not be able to, but could you kind of walk us through, for example, how you would see just the logistics be for an individual? I know you don't have the exact dates maybe of the week that it would be, but what would the process as to what would happen with an average student in terms of how this would work?
Yeah, we're going to really rely on some input from our building leaders as well on how this gets done. Again, it's a saliva test, so without being too graphic here, it's a spit test into a tube. And so tubes will be collected, sent to the lab. And then a district contact person would be notified by the company if there was a clinical indication of potential elevated levels that would then require the diagnostic test. In terms of the specific logistics, how it'll be collected, we still need to work through. Districts have done a number of things, from the tubes just being sent with the student, and then on certain days being told to bring them in. Others have collected on site, and so we're going to take some input from our building leaders regarding the best way to do that. And we've seen, some districts have seen success in both ways. So again, considering it as a surveillance test, not diagnostic, there's a little bit more flexibility than compared to if it were a strict diagnostic test. Christine, what would you add?
I think that the only thing I would add is that, the students or the family will be responsible for kind of completing the test, probably getting it into a concealed bag, a Ziploc bag, locking that Ziploc bag up, and then we'll have a way for them to give it to us so that we can have it being tested. So there will be some responsibility at home for families.
Sounds like that might, just listening to what you said and what he said, I think those things were different. Dan, I think Superintendent Bridges said we might be collecting at school. Is that what you just said?
Some districts have, is what I said. And so that's why, again, we're going to depend on a little bit of input from our building leaders who are going to be responsible to help collect some of this. So. Okay.
And I know that this information is all non-identifiable. And so for that reason, I'm pretty sure it doesn't qualify under HIPAA, correct? Because they just have a barcode. So it's not personally identifiable for any students, correct?
Correct. There's just a barcode, yes.
I thought, okay. So thank you for that. And remind me again, I know that the question was asked, but when are community members going to get more information about this?
Beginning in the coming days and over the next several weeks leading up to the school starting.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you. That was one question. In terms of the metrics, thank you also for the charts that you outlined and going through each of the factors and how they all work together. What kinds of success, I very much appreciate that we have been able through our mitigation protocols currently to not see spread. How have our other districts that have worked in adding in the testing as a mitigation, how have they seen that help to contribute to just their success in keeping the spread, from happening in the school context?
Some of the elementary districts in the county have had success in terms of remaining in for longer periods of time. I think many districts took some form of adaptive pause between Thanksgiving and the winter break on some level in different ways, depending on the size of the district, the number of students that they serve. Districts more like ours, larger unit districts, especially in our county, are newer to it. Some have opted not to do it. Some are just beginning that process, so we can't really say how it's worked for them. Christine?
Yeah, I think the thing that we want to really concentrate in on in the testing is that the value is in the asymptomatic individual. And the value really comes in that people who carry a high viral load are responsible for the majority of the spread. So if we focus in on being able to capture that, that's where the benefit comes, which allows us to keep schools open and in-person instruction going. It's kind of a domino effect.
Okay. Wonderful explanation. And I know that this is a real benefit that we're able to offer this so that it can add to our mitigations and allow us to open safely. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a really large portion of our community that, you know, agrees that this is a really important step to take and opts in. Next question is with regard to, you know, for some individuals in our community who may not have watched our previous board meeting, most of our details with regard to the return to learn plan, you know, the dates, et cetera, those were conveyed during our last meeting and those are unchanged, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. And so,
and again, to reminder, all of those documents, every document we have presented, every presentation we have made, FAQs, all communication that we've had to the board and community regarding is posted on our Return to Learn website.
And I know one of the details that we conveyed as a part of our last presentation was that we would be getting school-specific emails addressing issues like lunch. So could you just, but I know a concern for, we heard that concern in public comment. I know it's a concern for others. Can you just express in terms of that particular issue, how students will be able to, you know, continue forward without having that lunch period from 7:30 to 1?
Chuck and Stephanie, do you want to either address that, please?
Sure. So as it indicated, when we go to the block schedule, there will be a day whenever students' lunch hour will not be included in that half of the courses that they're taking on that day. We will have time built in throughout the day for students to take a break and eat and or drink as needed. There is a little longer passing period for that purpose as well. And then as indicated, our schedule has built in as much as possible the lunch hours at the beginning and end of the day. So students can report later or leave early and go to their lunches. And or their early and late releases have also been built in as much as possible to that schedule in that way. So there'll be a very small percentage of students who would not have their lunches built in at the beginning end of the day, and we'll make accommodations for them.
Okay. I know that more information about that will be included in the school-specific emails, but just to make people feel comfortable that their child isn't going to have to go all that time period. Okay, I have additional questions, but I will yield to Charles. I know Charles is our next person that I saw the hand for.
All right, thanks. I just have a follow-up question to an earlier one, and they're both on testing. One is on the SAT testing. Dr. Knowlton gave some explanation on that. I just want to get some clarification. So the recent results that we received back were from seniors who would have taken the test as juniors, except for the fact that, you know, we had the whole pandemic thing happen. And so that delayed their ability to get tested. But when you're doing the comparison, so you're comparing those senior scores to the prior junior year scores, which would have been the same set of students. It's just that they were delayed in when they actually took the exam. Is that correct so far?
Right. So essentially there's a 5-month kind of delay, right? So April, mid-September. So it's not exactly apples to apples.
Right,
I don't know that I don't know that that test is sensitive enough to see a significant change in that time interval, to be honest with you. But I think the good news is we didn't see like a dramatic decline, you know, and I think some people think kids have checked out, kids have become disinterested. I mean, this is still a high stakes test that assesses, you know, it's a difficult test. And so the difference is that it is given at a different time developmentally. It's, you know, a month into where we were at remote learning. So it was the third week of September relative to juniors taking it mid-April. So you could see slight differences based on that. So, you know, you might predict a slight score increase. We've never, you know, that's an empirical question you could answer. If we did it routinely, we'd know, you know, pretty matter-of-factly what kind of difference a 5-month span makes. But, you know, I think, very confident about the fact that I'd say our scores, it's safe to say we're stable.
Right. And so to that point, when you compare the change that we saw, do we have that relative to national benchmarks so that we know was the difference similar, above, below what we saw nationally, or do we have access to those types of benchmarks yet?
We do have access to that nationally, and our profile was very similar to what was found nationally. We don't have it relative to Illinois, and don't forget, not everybody took it in October in the United States. Not even everybody in Illinois. We had a choice about whether or not we wanted to do this when we did it. We could have given it later than September as well. We wanted to get it done so kids could use it to apply. So we don't have like a clean, direct comparison, but if you look globally and you kind of acknowledge some of the limitations, very comparable in terms of score change and score stability.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and thanks for the clarification. My next question is kind of back to the testing. So we mentioned earlier on the 70%, and I know my colleague Kristen Fitzgerald had some questions on this as well. But if for some reason we're not able to get to, let's just hope we get as many folks participating as possible, and this doesn't become an issue. But if it does, do we have some thoughts on what some strategies might be to encourage? I mean, others to do that? Are there parent-to-parent discussions where we can have parents who've opted in to maybe have conversations and allay concerns? I just want to get a sense of what some of our contingency plans are for trying to increase
a couple of things again, and Seneca is in the process right now developing a comprehensive communication and public relations campaign regarding this, about the importance really of this as an additional mitigation strategy. We are taking a significant step here in our return to learn plan to get more students in-person learning. And that's going to be successful as long as we're sound in all of our mitigation strategies, from the mask wearing to the social distancing to then the surveillance testing, for us to be able to really identify and get ahead of any sort of spread and identifying those asymptomatic individuals. So really focusing on the importance of that education regarding how it works, what it really means, and again, the confidentiality of it. Again, the company doing the testing will have no idea who the individuals are. We'll have one point of contact in district to be able to identify for a potential clinical suggestion that they should require further testing. And then we can talk further about, what other strategies there may be. But right now, our focus, in talking to some of my superintendent colleagues, some districts have made the decision to make it mandatory. We're not at that point just yet. We will, at this point, we're recommending voluntary. Again, part of the concern is our size and the volume of which of being, potentially, with my numbers here, 11,500 weekly tests, potentially, when you look at secondary students and all of our staff. That's a pretty heavy lift in terms of being able to move that efficiently. So that's if all kids. And then if we have 70% that are in person, so then we take a percentage of that, we're at a manageable number. So.
And the participation rate is not just a one-time, it's a participation rate on an ongoing basis, correct? It's not just.
The plan is, I'll talk about it a little bit later, in the agenda, but again, would be, as we ask for board approval on a contract, it would be providing for a weekly test for all of our students who are in person for at least 12 weeks.
Right. Okay. So it's not just high participation rate, but it's high consistent participation rate.
Correct.
Among those who opt in. Okay, thank you. And I'll hold the rest of my questions when we go into that agenda item in more detail. So thank you for that.
Additional questions from the board?
I think Patrick Knowlton has something to add.
I saw his hand and I almost called on him.
I just want to clarify a little bit more for Mr. Cush's question. Be assured that our students, relative to whether or not they were juniors or seniors, our typical, our average, our ordinary, I hate to say ordinary, but our ordinary student, our regular student, is functioning between the national 75th and the national 80th percentile rank. So if you soak that in for a second, that's how deviated we are from a normal curve relative to the rest of the country. And so if you overlaid what we accomplished in September on the 23rd with seniors, and you factored that into accountability, that would continue to place us in an exemplary place.
Thank you for that. That's what I was trying to get to tease out a little bit to understand that. So thank you for that further clarification. I think it's important for the community to understand that, where we are. Thank you.
Questions from the board? Okay, I have a couple more. I just wanted to know, I know that you have talked a little tiny bit about vaccines and what we expect in terms of that. How long in the future do you expect that is in terms of, thinking forward for both for our parents when they're thinking about, when that will be for perhaps themselves, but also for our staff members?
In a conversation with the health department today, it's a little hard to crystal ball kind of where they're at. They're currently still in the process of providing vaccines for individuals in Group 1A, our healthcare providers, residents of long-term care facilities, first responders, things of that nature. And then also just of note, included within that, the healthcare providers, some of our school nurses have already been able to receive the vaccine. Also, what I learned today is that our OTs, PTs, speech and language pathologists are also eligible under Group 1A. So we'll work on making sure that they're aware of that for sign up with the county. County also, just as we get to a point where more individuals are eligible for the vaccination, are going to need partners. They can't be solely responsible for the administration of the vaccine. Again, we're talking about a very well-populated county. And so they have been looking for partnership with school districts. I was invited on a call with a couple other superintendents prior to the winter vacation to just kind of talk logistically about what it could look like, what role schools or school sites could play. Encouraging her maybe by the end of February, we could be into Group 1B, which would include more of the education staff, more of the educators, in groups like that. But it's going to take time to administer. An important thing that they like to point out is, for example, we shouldn't send all of the staff at Naperville Central or Naperville North High School in one day to get the vaccine, because if there is a reaction to it, multiple people have a reaction to it, then you're going to strain your staff. And then when we look at our metrics and our ability to staff our schools, that could be impacted. So it'll have to be kind of looking at groups of students or groups of our educators, and then prioritizing them. And that's some of the work that'll still have to be done both as a county level and within districts. For example, do we prioritize those who are requiring some form of an accommodation, those who work more, mostly face-to-face with students? So hopefully we'll be in a position more toward the end of February, perhaps prior to spring break, where we're seeing more widespread distribution of the vaccine. There have been national news reports about in terms of where we're at with the vaccine distribution, but as more and more become available and more are getting approval for their emergency use, that'll increase the volume. So again, it's the health department has been receiving their shipments, have been receiving their what they need, and are in the process of distributing them.
Thank you. I know that we have some presentations coming with regard to school improvement plans. So I do have questions about academics, but I'm wondering if it would be better, would you prefer that we wait till we get that data there and then hold questions on academics to that point?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay. All right, so I'll hold on that. And then just in terms of transition, I know that you mentioned that we will have those individual schools will have different days where there's, for example, kindergarten, for example, and how soon will we find out more information about that? And I know that you specifically have mentioned looking at kindergarten, 6th grade and 9th grade. What other, will there be other transition activities in terms of other groups of students, or will that be kind of, school dependent?
Be mostly school dependent. Chuck or Stephanie, I don't know if there's anything you can add to that to just give a sense of what's going to happen.
Yeah, Mrs. Fitzgerald, specifically for elementary, it is the kindergarten group, and our kindergarten teachers and our principals are finalizing plans for that. And certainly it looks a little bit different in a school like Naper with less students coming in than a school like Mill Street with a larger group. So that information will be going out to parents, hopefully either by the end of the week or early next week. And then also any of our new students that have yet to come into the building would be invited in. Keep in mind, many of those students have been identified, have been in the building already, in the last couple months even. So those plans are being made really at a classroom level under the guidance of the school principal as well. And Stephanie, on 6th grade and 9th grade?
Yes, and so very similar to what Mr. Freund just said, we also are kind of that fine line between giving the schools autonomy because their cultures and their communities and sizes are a little bit different, but also giving the kids the same experience or similar experience across the board. We are also focusing on 6th graders and 9th graders and new students to their buildings, and those will be created. We're working with middle school principals later this week, and then the high school also, as you are well aware, they've also done some transition and some small tours with 9th graders, and will continue to do that as we move forward.
Right. I know that they did the link, and outside even. So I know that some of that has gone out, but I know that there's that 6th grade program web that some schools, do you envision that being a part of this process, like with a mentorship kind of thing? Or is that sort of maybe will that be when we get back to school in person?
Sure. Some of that's on the table for the agenda that I'm meeting with the middle school principals with this week. And again, they will have some autonomy based on what their needs in the building are.
Okay, thank you. Okay, like I said, I have academics questions and I actually have some social and emotional, but I think it's better to put them at the school improvement plan discussion. So I'll save those. Does anybody else on the board have any additional questions? Okay, so I think that that will conclude this portion of the agenda. Okay, so we will then move on to item 7.03, President's Report. I do not have a President's Report this evening. So we'll move to item 7.04, Board of Education Reports. Do we have any Board of Education reports this evening? Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'll go on to item 8, Discussion without action, and item 8.01, School Improvement Plans.
Great. I'm going to invite Dr. Patrick Knowlton, our Assistant Superintendent for Assessment and Accountability, to update the Board of Education on our school improvement planning process. Obviously, in light of the pandemic and what we've experienced since March, the process looks a little bit different this year, but nonetheless, our schools are committed to this commitment to ongoing continuous improvement. And Patrick will share with you an overview of their process, and then we'll be happy to address questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bridges. Happy New Year, everyone. Greetings, Board of Education. It's a pleasure to submit to you 47, I think it's 47 PDFs. The least important one is probably my slide deck. The most important ones are the 23 school improvement plans, as well as action plans that we submit for your approval at the next board meeting. If you go on the next slide, we're going to talk about a few things here and invite questions as usual. I want to talk a little bit about the process of school improvement planning and the changes based on the pandemic and remote learning. Talk a little bit about the components of the school improvement plans and action plans. Summarize our revision process, review next steps relative to improvement planning, and then of course recommend that you approve the plans. This is a process that is not like, this is an ongoing evolving process. It's not like a term paper you write, you submit, you get a grade on, and it's done. It's an iterative process. As you know, we are strongly committed to constant improvement. I know they're called school improvement plans, but it's really about student improvement and growth. On the next slide, I've given you the graphic that I've shown you before. It's connected to our blueprint commitment 2.16.a, implementing a common research-based improvement process that maximizes growth and achievement. Again, at the student level, we're most concerned obviously with school growth, but fundamentally this comes down to one student at a time making progress and growing and showing achievement gains and SEL growth as well. On the next slide, I have the philosophical beliefs. These are the Joe Murphy beliefs that we've held on to in this district. As I transition into this position, we care about context. So you can't make plans and goals and think about how you want things to get better without considering the history and culture of schools, right? That should be relatively apparent. We adjust based on the level and type of school. We don't believe structures predict performance, so we're not bound by the things that are structurally in place. Improvement, of course, is an array of integrated efforts. I think this frustrates people, but change obviously comes about not necessarily through one thing changing, but through multiple efforts, multiple strategies, and of course involving multiple individuals. We align our plans to make improvement and changes, and then this is not a political statement here, but earlier trumps later. We believe in primary intervention and doing things, catching things while they're small problems pays off in the long run rather than addressing things later through remediation. And that's a That's an educational commitment we've made as a district. On the next slide, it's a graphic that shows you the cyclical process. We're constantly reviewing in a normal, typical year when we have access to some of the standardized tests that we traditionally administer throughout the year. And at the conclusion, we review student performance data. We do that, as you know, at the district, school, grade level, fundamentally at the student level. We take a look at what our prior improvements were and what our plans accomplished. We're always interested in identifying what was successful, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to modify or change. And then, of course, we reestablish goals and identify our priorities using empirically supported action steps. That's really important. What that means in English is we want to use science-supported strategies that help kids show growth and progress. And so that assess, plan, implement, and monitor cycle reflects that. This is just a graphic or a slide that shows you, and we haven't changed this year. And we also, by the way, didn't change the goals for the school improvement plans. We made a 3-year plan starting in 19 and ending in 21. And this is the format in which we write goal statements. Every school or program has an ELA goal. Every school or program has a mathematics goal, as well as an SEL goal. And we link those, as you know, to external facing accountability assessments. So it connects to what counts. It connects to the standards by which we're measured. I know SMART goals have been around for probably 15 to 20 years, but a SMART goal basically means you write something that most people, if they read it, they'd understand what you're trying to assess. It's time bound, it's relatively concrete, and we've clearly identified something that's achievable, but still ambitious and measurable. So that's just an example of a goal statement. The historic performance is where we summarize historically, how have we done? And of course, it's natural to see variation in performance. In this example, you'll see from the transition park in 17 to 18 and then IER to 19, you'll see gradually increasing proportions of students meeting or exceeding standards. That does happen. Sometimes schools go up, sometimes schools go down. Don't forget, we're interested in trends. We want to look at multiple data points across time. So we review the most recent historic performance, like I said, connected to accountability assessments. We target relevant academic areas. In our case, it's ELA, mathematics, and SEL. And then we, of course, formally acknowledge whether or not a prior goal was attained. On the next slide, this breaks down the benchmarks of success. We've asked every school and every school improvement team to identify sort of benchmark or milestone indicators. Every school is allowed to write about a specific group of students that maybe they target specifically for improvement. In this example, you can see it was written based on NWA map growth being given in the fall and then in the spring. And then that's mapped out to 21 as well. So some plans may have, for example, as in this example, students of economic disadvantage, some may not. That's at the prerogative, I guess, at the school, depending on what their needs are and what their student profile looks like and who and which groups specifically demonstrate needs. On the next slide is an example. Oh, this is not an example at all. It's where we are with school improvement plans. So as I said before, we did not change the 21 goals. So that's really important to understand. It would be very, very difficult to provide a rationale on what direction you would change. I know everyone has the question, where are we? How are students doing? Could we meet those targets? Are they possible? So in the interest of transparency and maintaining high expectations, we elected to maintain the 21 goals despite not knowing, like the second bullet says, where we ended school year 20, right? So we were not able to administer the traditional accountability assessments last spring. Not knowing that, we've maintained the 21 goals. We were also obviously not able to complete the year using NWA map growth or the early childhood measure. And we, so very difficult in terms of like getting a solid sense of whether or not we're on track using the benchmarks that we've written to identify growth. The last two bullets have to do with what we have done to help guide our understanding of students and their growth. We've taken a look at every grading period so far. So we did this for K through 5, and we looked at the proportion of students and their proficiency on report card reported standards relative to the prior academic year. We wanted to learn, are there standards that we are remarkably successful relative to prior years or remarkably unsuccessful in terms of learning and teaching and having students acquire proficiency in core academic reported areas? The short answer to that is We've seen strengths, we've seen challenges relative to instruction remotely. We've also seen some standards are easier to teach in a remote context. So a lot of variation there, but that's a way we've tried to keep a handle on where students are in terms of meeting or exceeding standards. And then the last bullet has to do with our work on looking at grades and comparing grade profiles. What are the proportion of grades that students are achieving in 6 through 12 down to the course level for every school. So that's something we've tried to take a look at to see, are we seeing a significant shift in grading? I can tell you, I looked at this today at the junior high school level. I'm just looking off to my notes here because I haven't memorized this. But just to give you a ballpark, because people always ask the question about Fs, in a normal year, about 1% of our student population at the junior high school are not 1% of students, but 1% of grades are Fs. We are at 2% this year. So you could look at that as a 100% increase, but only 2% of all the grades that we've given to students at the conclusion of the first trimester were Fs relative to a typical year were 1%. At the high school level, if you're interested in comparing, we're typically also at about 1% of grades issued. That's not 1% of students, it's 1% of grades. And this year it's at about 4% of grades. So I just want to give you some information at a very high level on the things we look at. We also see in some cases a higher proportion of higher grades as well. So I just want to give you some context in terms of how we're monitoring student performance, given that we don't have some of the traditional measures. On the next slide, this is kind of a snapshot of an action plan. And I'm breaking down here. It's probably hard to see on a screen depending on screen size, but these are the action steps. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of school improvement plans. We ask schools again to repeat what was the overall goal. You can see in this case, it's an example of ELA. And then the action steps are kind of the umbrella categories of focus, and the tasks get down to exactly what is it that that school improvement team has identified and committed themselves to implementing, who's responsible, predicted target dates, and actual completion dates. This is really the only document that we ask school improvement teams to adjust. In some, we did not ask them to delete anything. We said, look, if you have an actual or predicted target date that wasn't met, make a note as to why that happened. And many times that happened because of some of the limitations of doing some of this work remotely. We also invited schools to add new tasks depending on what they thought was necessary or reasonable, given some of the challenges we've encountered over the last 10 months. So there's been some editorial work in terms of why or why not, whether or not the tasks were completed or the target dates were met, and then were there appropriate additional tasks to support action steps. Those have been added. On the next slide, this is where we are, like I said, with action plan status. Recognizing limitations of remote learning, we acknowledge some of the things we were able to accomplish and not, we added. And then lastly, you'll notice in some of the plans, and Dr. Leeks can speak to this if you need more detail, but we're starting to see the addition of equity action steps and tasks, and that's based on each individual school's timeline of implementation. We've set kind of a target have to have on your plan action steps and tasks and goals by 2023. So don't be alarmed that you don't see that on all. Schools are in different places in terms of implementing some of the work that we're doing in the area of inclusion and equity. This is an example of an SEL goal. I know when we've talked about this before, it looks different because it's really a list of things we're going to do. The goals aren't written in a SMART goal format. We are looking at, and I think we've talked about this with Dr. Igo before, the use of the Panorama Survey as a possible way of evaluating kind of globally student sense of where they are with SEL development, and using that as kind of a benchmark and an ongoing way to evaluate SEL progress at a high level. So similar format to academic goals. We also have the summary of research-based action steps as well. And then of course, the majority of the emphasis is on continuing the implementation of the curriculum. On the next slide, I just summarized for you early childhood and high school improvement plans. This is largely unchanged. You can see, you could read the early childhood plan if you'd like, as well as the action steps. We're still relying on using teaching strategies goal as one of our metrics. That's not unlike NWA MAP something that you cannot administer remotely in any way that's reasonable. Our high school plans were written with a 2-year time frame. We're using the SAT and PSAT as growth metrics. Like I said, we're waiting for the PSAT and MSQT. The SAT, it's harder to use because, you know, it wasn't, like Mr. Cush pointed out, actually administered at the same time. It's obviously something we look at, but it was primarily administered as, because it's a requirement for all students to take to graduate, and less as an accountability measure from the state perspective. On the next slide, and this is just a summary slide for the work that's been done through Connections. This is unchanged, continued emphasis on progress towards educational employment and independent living, proportion of students competitively employed, and continued implementation of SEL relative to safety and respect feelings. And this slide really has to do with where are we going from here. Like I said earlier, we anticipate the capacity to administer accountability assessments. Like I said, ISB's is operating under the, not assumption, but the directive that we administer these different assessments as we transition back to some degree in-person instruction. So we're still waiting to do the kids or the kindergarten individual development survey. Access is the assessment that we will administer to students after the 15th of March to evaluate English language proficiency progress. You know about the IAR, it's the replacement for PARC, administering in grades 3rd through 8th, reading and mathematics, or ELA in mathematics. The DLM is an administered test to students for which the IAR is developmentally inappropriate. We're on course to administer the science assessment. That's actually in its first year of true revision this year. And then lastly, of course, we plan on continuing to administer the PSAT, the SAT, the PSAT, and the PSAT 9 as well. So as far as I'm concerned, we're well poised and positioned to administer these tests. Once we've done the transition back to hybrid, we'll be in a place where we can do this in addition to some of the internal assessments we've talked about with NWA MAP in both reading and mathematics. I'm not sure if I have another slide. I guess I do. Okay, so we did talk about this. I just mentioned this actually, the NWA MAP growth administration to students. As you know, that's also part of our academically talented and accelerated model. So we're interested in that for a lot of different reasons, beyond the fact that we'd absolutely like to get an understanding of where students are academically. As far as improvement goes, we'll do the traditional data review. Once we've got clean data back from the state, that usually happens around mid-July, start taking a look at where we are, how students have performed, incorporate that into our NWA MAP data, and then of course, take a look at reviewing whether or not what we were able to accomplish, whether or not that was effective in terms of the action steps, and what are the things we need to do differently. There's always a peer review component to this, where principals don't do this in isolation, their school improvement teams don't do it in isolation. There's collaboration across and between levels in terms of what works, what's effective, and what's helping us move forward in terms of growth. I think, and that pretty much concludes my presentation, at least formally. If you had any questions or comments, I'd welcome them at this time.
Okay, wonderful. And just looking at that list of documents and going through those, you know, page by page, line by line, it is so evident all of the huge amount of work and care that our school improvement teams and leaders have put into not just the original implementation of these plans and the original crafting of these plans, but the revisions of these plans due to the situation that we're in. So huge thank you from the Board of Education to all of those who have been a part of completing this whole process with the school improvement plans.
We have incredibly dedicated staff. We have incredibly dedicated staff that, you know, every day work hard to make this as, you know, as beneficial for everyone as possible. So I've never worked in a district that's taken this more seriously than Naperville 203 in terms of just the desire to improve and the desire to get better. You know, we're already at the top of our game. We expect to continue to be at the top of our game, but it feels relentless from my perspective in terms of what schools want to accomplish as far as constantly trying to get better.
Which is wonderful, that striving to help all students grow. So thank you for that. And I know we have questions, but I just wanted to say that global appreciation is just so important when we look at all of the work that's gone into those documents. Okay, questions from the board. I see Donna's hand.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for that presentation. I'm thrilled to see that we have maintained the 2021 goals. I think that in and of itself is hugely commended, especially going in blind, basically, right? Like they don't even know if they've achieved the 2020 goals and they're committing to pushing forward. So I appreciate that tremendously. I had a community member reach out to me and just ask some questions about how the goals are developed and why different schools have different percentages on similar goals. And I tried to explain that. I think sometimes when we look at all of those documents, it's easy to think that, schools just, some schools just say, oh, we're going to move up 2%, which is like not the process at all. So I tried to explain all that went into deciding on how to shift, like what the goals are from year to year. But I think that somebody on staff can probably do it better than I can. So can we just get a little bit of insight into the process of the school improvement goals?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for your question. Well, as you know, there are profile differences across schools, right? And so different schools serve different populations that have different needs. And so we fully transparently acknowledge that, depending on maybe the program at a school, for example, a school that houses academically talented students, a program or a school that houses students that have higher needs of English learner or English language learner needs, schools perform differently. And so it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science. We generally like to see roughly 3 to 5% gain per year. It depends. 3 to 5% is a different number of students depending on the size of the school. You know that as a math teacher. And so, we take a look at the resources that are allocated into a specific area. We take a look at historic progress. How has this school moved forward? Has this school sort of plateaued? Have they stagnated? Have they continued to climb? What are they doing that's effective? So, we really want to have a solid understanding of what's working and what's working well, and can you continue that with integrity and continue to expect, more gain and more growth. So it's kind of a variety of things. I mean, there's not a formula for it. Of course, we do direct schools to identify groups of students, and I don't call them subgroup anymore because I feel that's pejorative, but we ask schools to identify groups of students that have needs in their building that they acknowledge. That, for example, maybe it's boys, who struggle in ELA relative to girls, or maybe it's students with IEPs have a particular strength or weakness in certain academic areas. So, we allow schools to identify the group that they want to really focus on while improving, of course, everybody else. It's not as though we don't expect the entire school to improve, but we do want to look at data to help us understand, where are the needs, where are the strengths, where are the challenges, what's working, what's not, what's giving us the most benefit, and what's likely to move based on historic performance and resource allocation. So that's not really a flow chart, paint by numbers answer, but there's a lot of things to think about in terms of where that goes. We also take a look at some of the internal assessment to see, for example, historically, how did we do when we were giving performance series? What kind of changes did we see on that? Do we expect that to be reflected in later accountability assessments? So variety of sources of information that kind of come down in the end to essentially a number and then tasks.
Great, thank you for that. You added things that I didn't in my response, so I appreciate that. I also forgot, and I know that you highlighted already, the peer reviews of how they collaborate with other schools on their improvement plans too. So that was something that I neglected to put in my answer, so I appreciate that. I just don't think that maybe 3 to 5% gain is what you mentioned as an average. I think that's like you said, that can be very lofty. And I think that it doesn't seem like it when you say 3 to 5%, but we're moving the whole average of, I think, and the normal curve distribution of those students up 3 to 5%. And I just, I don't know, how can we better have our community understand that? I just think that it seems like it's so small. I know it's not. I just want to make sure that we understand how elaborate that kind of a 3 to 5% gain is.
I mean, I think like you should reference, if you're asking people to understand that, first of all, I'm glad they're interested. But secondly, I would say look at the percent of students that are meeting or exceeding standards and just look at that across time and take a look at, and if you know the total school population, that might give you a rough sense of the numbers. But if you look proportionally at what's the percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding standards across time, I think that's more understandable than 2 and 3 and 5. 3, 4, and 5 seem like very small numbers. It doesn't seem like much significant, but in a larger school, that's a lot of students. And so in a smaller school, that's not as many. And so, depending on the scale of the school, you really have to understand not just the percent, but the number of students that actually involves moving forward. So we're quite fortunate to be in a place where, many students meet and many students exceed standards. There's also a lot of students that are very, very close to approaching standards as well, that we've seen movement over time and growth. You probably also remember that, I know we haven't looked at this data in a while, but we're actually, the state has shifted more towards an interest in growth. And so it's of course important to be proficient, but it's also important to show change over time. And so, we've had some internal conversations about maybe shifting not away from proficiency, but also looking at how we're doing in terms of growth. And are we moving students along given their starting point in a way that's expected, that's out of the ordinary, meaning more significant than what is typical. That kind of puts on another layer of probably complexity, but it also sort of rounds out the full picture.
Yeah, thank you for that. Measuring growth is important because then we hit all the students, including all the ones who are well exceeding over their expectations too. So that's would be a lofty goal as well, and I appreciate that. Thank you for all your work, and thank you to our staff for all of their time and energy put into the plans and moving them forward, because I know that it's no small task. Thanks.
Questions from the board? I see Charles.
So not really a question, but just kind of to piggyback on Donna's comment, because Donna basically asked my question, but I do think it's important for to help get some understanding and perspective in terms of the challenges associated. I mean, when you're at high averages and you're operating at high percentile rankings on some of these test scores, moving numbers requires, one, maintaining the high numbers you already have, right, and then improving the underperforming segments or what have you in order to kind of move the average up. So it's should not be underappreciated, the work that goes into getting to a high level, keeping all students performing at that high level, continuing to grow that population while also growing and targeting certain segments of the population. Some of the examples that you gave, and really doing that work to understand that. So it's really a lot of work. And I just think that, Donna, I commend the fact that you asked the question, because I think it's really important to continue to ask that questions and remind folks what really goes into some of the numbers. Because to your point, 2 or 3% doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're already performing at a high level, it just becomes that much more incrementally difficult to move from high to higher to high to highest, and I just think it's important to continue to ask those questions and highlight it to make sure that we're focusing on the right areas.
Right, we're talking about tremendous, remarkable efforts of staff and support staff and teachers keeping us at altitude, and so in the face of adversity, in face of all the things that we constantly hear about, the students, not just epidemic, but just, in general, adolescence and childhood now related to ACEs, related to mental health issues, related to, cultural turmoil and all kinds of things. There's a lot of adversity, and we keep the plane at altitude. And don't forget, the last time we did this, we were the highest achieving unit district in every subject, in ELA, math, and science. I expect we're going to be in that same place again. There's no reason not to expect that. Every staff member is doing everything they can to move us forward and keep us in place and help students achieve and grow. And so we can't take for granted the fact that we are high achieving alone by itself. You want to see students continue to grow. The long-term plan with the College Board Suite was, for growth to be demonstrated from PSAT 9 to 10 to SAT. We didn't get far enough along in the administration of that because of what happened last spring. We look forward to showing that growth also occurs, not just at 3 through 8, but also occurs at the high school level as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, questions from the board? Oh, Christine.
I don't have a question so much as just a comment and a compliment. What I like when I'm reading through these plans is I've noticed I'm coming up on 4 years of service that they've changed, not just in, you know, the percentage of students that we want to meet a certain goal, but the things that the plans include. And so the SEL, I know, I'm pretty sure was added just after, the SEL goals were added just after I was seated. I know we had added if we've achieved goals or not. You know, it's not just about celebrations, but it's about reflections for when we set the goals for the next year. And then this year, you know, the equity action steps. So I like that it's not just about moving the kids, you know, it's just not about growth in your traditional subjects, but we're looking at a very holistic picture of how to move our kids forward, taking into consideration some of the things that you mentioned with ACEs and cultural differences. And you know, we're trying to look at the students holistically, and then I think by extension, the building. So I appreciate that evolution in what this document has told us, at least in the 4 years that I've been here. So thank you.
Thanks.
Joe.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. I want to follow up on what Christine said about the SEL and kind of the growth of that. I think it's really exciting. One of the things that I noticed going through those is right now a lot of the SEL goals are more implementation goals, and there are a lot of really great initiatives going on at the schools and professional development going on. I guess the question I have is, when are we going to start looking at more quantitative metrics for SEL gains in the schools? Some schools are using the 5 Essentials survey. Some schools have kind of these homegrown surveys that they use. And yeah, you mentioned this panorama survey. So I'd like to see you know, more quantitative look at SEL gains within schools. And I think also with the comprehensive equity plan, there are these quantitative indicators of success, and some of the SEL metrics could help you know, look at those success indicators within the district also. So I think it's, you know, kind of a good cycle that we could get into, you know, that reinforce each other.
Absolutely. I think that is definitely our hope and our plan, particularly around that panorama survey. Some of the things that it really gets at are a sense of belonging and a sense of being able to identify somebody that they count on. So those are definitely things that we see kind of intersecting and kind of coming together. We continue to always look for ways to get as quantitative as we can with SEL without losing track of the fact that some skills in SEL are not quantitative. And it's important to remember that. They're soft skills for a reason, because they're not always something we can quantitatively count. So making sure that we're balancing that out kind of across both ways, even as we look to, you know, how we grade within SEL and provide feedback to kids and parents on that as well. So we'll continue to look for ways to fine tune that. And we're hopeful that once we can kind of get back into the swing of things, we can begin to really utilize that panorama data to give us a good sense of what is that climate and culture, and is it strong enough for us to be able to really identify and work through the SEL skills.
Thanks. Yeah, and I understand there's some SEL skills that are really difficult to measure, you know, quantitatively, but yeah, there may be some qualitative metrics or something that you could use as well to look at gains. And then the other one, I want to go back to one of my favorite topics, which is science. And so You mentioned the ISA is going to be given this year, and with the rollout of the NGSS, and now we'll have an assessment that's tuned or starting to be tuned to the NGSS implementation. Is there going to be a set of science standards that will be added as well, since we'll have a way to look at gains in science now?
So in a nutshell, last spring was when the ISA, the revised, the improved, the aligned, standards aligned ISA was to be deployed. And this is a great example of building the plane while you fly it. The plan was to give it to students at the grade levels 5th, 8th, and 11th, and then determine its utility. You do the usual test development procedures on a new assessment. And so, of course, that didn't happen. So that's been delayed until this spring. We want to use that data. We're interested in science, of course, especially connected to what we're teaching. I definitely think it has utility for the future, but I don't want to get too far over my skis as well and just tell you that whatever results we get this spring, they could be questioned relative to obviously the current situation, but the fact that it's an entirely new assessment that the state is really constructing and refining and revising. So we'll be able to definitely use that data and then entertain the possibility of writing in science goals moving forward if that's the direction collectively we want to go.
Joe, one thing I'm going to add also, just because you always do ask the science questions, and I like that, is that we're in a good position right now because our curriculum is already upgraded to meet those standards. Not only is our curriculum upgraded to that, we also have our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Jennifer Donatelli, sits on that assessment design committee. So she really is in tune with what that assessment blueprint looks like and what our steps would need to be moving forward if that was something that we added goals to in a formal school improvement process. But I definitely will let you know in an informal way that our buildings are very much committed to our new science curriculum. Even right now during our remote teaching, we are finding ways to meet our students in an online setting with our science curriculum. So that's something that is very alive and moving within the district. So we're excited about that. We think we're in a good position.
Great, thank you. I'll yield to others.
Questions from the board? Okay, I have a couple questions, and I also want to compliment all of the different things that have gone into these school improvement plans and how much they have changed and developed and become better over the past, number of years. The fact that we have SMART goals, the fact that they are time bound and they have the numeric expectations, the SEL, the equity, the things that we are adding in, it really shows the commitment of the school district and the board to all of those areas because they're quantifiable expectations. And so I am so appreciative of this whole process that makes sure that we are understanding where we are in these regards and really making sure that we continue to grow in all of these areas. So I am thrilled to see the addition of equity and our equity goals into the school improvement plans. That shows the true commitment. And I am very excited to see that even though we have given a deadline of 2023, there are many action steps already in these action plans. And that was exciting to see. And they are not just it's clear that we are looking at it and saying, this is a part of math, this is a part of ELA, et cetera. And so I'm just really thrilled to see those action steps and to see the thought process that our school improvement administrators and teams and teachers and the staff that are on those teams, they're thinking through and really putting forward in terms of how we're going to get from here to there. I also want to mention, just in terms of as we talk about maintaining our goals, I want to be sure that we're clear that when we talk about maintaining our goals, we're not talking about maintaining on a flat level. We are maintaining the increase in our goals, right? Because sometimes you might think about just in hearing maintain, that it sounds like, oh, we're just staying flat. It's great, in my opinion, that even without knowing, we are increasing and expecting that growth. So on that note, I want to ask in terms of, you gave us some data as to how our kids are doing, our students are doing at various levels. So I want to dig in for a second here in terms of high school. So you talked a little bit about the 1% to the 4%, obviously concerning. I want to figure out a little bit more because I know we haven't had a semester grade yet. Can you tell us a little bit about what kinds of Fs those are and what kinds of steps were taken immediately to ensure that as we saw those kinds of alarming trends that we have addressed them? And I know some of that is included in the school improvement plans. And so for any individual from our community that is looking at that, I would love for you to look up your school because that's so reassuring to see the different steps that are being taken. But I'm just wondering if you could give us kind of a global high school look in terms of what Fs you're talking about there in terms of the grading periods and what kinds of things were immediately undertaken in this whole process.
Okay, so I'll give credit to Carrie Ray and Jackie Thornton for leading the PLC charge in terms of transforming that student level information into team level intervention. So that information has been shared at every grading interval. So every time we issue a letter grade, there's progress grades, obviously semester grades. That information is shared with both high schools, and then that's integrated into their PLC process where they took a look at who are these students, what courses are they in. We have identified and connected attendance or engagement really to these grades, as well as if there's any behavioral concerns, which there's fewer because students are not in person. So that gets worked through at the PLC level, whether it's a cluster or group of students that aren't successful, or if it's an individual student that's not successful. We're not just looking at Fs, we're looking at students that are maybe underperforming in a way that's unexpected relative to prior performance as well. If they're getting Cs and Ds and typically get As and Bs, I mean, that's as much of a concern, obviously, as well as students that are failing, looking at the relationship to attendance, looking at whether or not there needs to be some type of intervention involving a counselor or social worker or somebody to provide some type of support. Are there technical issues? So there's lots of idiosyncratic sort of individual approaches to trying to understand why an individual student is not performing as expected in a particular course. We've also broken that down by gender. We've broken it down by race, ethnicity. We've broken it down by disability status. Really trying to get at where is this occurring? Who does this involve? And are there sort of group level or system level interventions or work that needs to be done supporting kids that happen to fall into certain categories that need additional support? So I know that's like a generic global explanation, but essentially we're sharing that with the high schools, and they're looking at that in PLC teams to try to understand who are these students, what do they need, and why are they not succeeding.
Thank you for that, because I think especially for me, looking at these plans and not having the data, it's really important to know what data we have and what we're doing with that data. And can you speak as well, and I know this is in the school improvement plans too, to what kinds of things our counselors are adding to that from the SEL side, either you or Dr. Igo. In terms of, I know that there were specific things that were identified as a part of the action steps for our high schools and our junior highs and all of our schools, but speaking specifically on that high school level, kind of some of those steps that are being taken by our counselors on executive functioning and on the other areas that are a part of this picture too.
Right. I don't know if either Jane or Christine could speak to the curriculum that addresses some of those SEL needs that's implemented at the high school level.
Well, I just, specifically, there was quite a few things I thought I saw in some of our high school action steps in terms of just looking at all of those different areas, the signs of suicide and the counseling stuff that is going on that we're screening, the transition activities that are going on in terms of helping students who are in need of greater assistance with, their return to school. There's a variety of different things. If anybody wants to, I'm just kind of putting them out there, but if anybody wants to address that, I was comforted knowing how often that we hear about social and emotional concerns. I was happy to see what a robust amount of steps were being thought through as a part of the school improvement process.
I can speak a little bit to that. I think really it goes back to really Carrie and Jackie really leading that charge and really grounding them in the PLC process. Okay. And there is a behavior PLC that really does look at that SEL. And so there's lots of different layers that are going there. There's obviously the SOS things that we've put in place. But we've also just implemented a brand new curriculum for our counselors who are rolling that out. And so there's just different places for them to build that in. They've identified places where kids need, absolutely all kids need to have this instruction. And then here's where we're going to go in and put some additional supports in for executive functioning. So they've done a really nice job of making sure that our student services staff knows and understands where their students are and making sure that they've built plans for that kind of moving forward. So they have done some really nice work.
So in terms of, that was super helpful in terms of looking at those grades. And I know that we are doing similar processes in the junior high level as well, looking at their action steps in the PLC process and looking at those benchmark grades. How about on the EC and elementary level? So again, knowing that we don't have our normal data of like the MAP and the IAR, how do we feel about how students are doing during these time frames with these particular challenges?
I mean, looking at, so we, like I think I mentioned before, by school, by grade, we looked at reported standards that parents typically see on report cards. And we see in many cases, Ms. Fitzgerald, there's stable performance. It's not unusual. Students are attaining standards to the degree teachers can assess this in a remote situation in a similar way, or a similar proportion of students are attaining standards as they would during a typical year. That's not the case in all standards. There's some instances where we found that, and don't ask me if we give you an example, I'd have to go through school by school, but there are some standards where we're seeing higher levels of proficiency. For some reason, some standards seem to be more easily taught remotely. Not saying that's a reason to stay remote, but there's also some standards that are more challenging to like some aspects of writing, for example, difficult to instruct remotely, to give students concrete feedback on. So, there's not like a universal, this is not working, this is really working. It very much comes down to looking at, for example, second grade at Maplebrook and seeing how are students doing, or third grade at Naper, or things like that. You know what I mean? And so generally speaking, overall, if you look at standards proficiency, students are on course to the degree that grades reflect, the reporting that teachers provide relative to standards reflect student achievement. So, I would, if I said to you that students are abysmally not meeting standards, that's absolutely not the truth. I mean, we see great growth in performance at the elementary level. Dr. Eigel might be able to talk more about early childhood and the work that's been done there, but students are making progress. Of course, we look forward to in-person instruction and believe that could.
And I know that when you see those standards that where you are finding that it is more problematic, I know you're using that data immediately as a part, and the teams are as a part of the action steps, that they're working to address that immediately. But I know as well, as we start to think through where our students might need additional assistance. Like, for example, you mentioned that there was the down, on the SAT, the math, that might be an area where we craft additional assistance for students. So I know that we're using that data in a lot of different ways, but it helps to sort of get a sense from you globally as to what you're seeing.
Right.
And anything on early childhood, I'm happy to hear that as well, because I know that they're a little bit different. And I know that they've had a little bit of different strategies in terms of some of their in-person versus all remote.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely more difficult for early childhood. So early childhood assessment does not look like other assessment. It's not paper pencil. It's very much portfolio. It's very much watching kids play and seeing what they're picking up. That's just not possible for us to do in the current kind of situation. So we do have our staff, working with families to get a better understanding of how things are working. But as our kids come back, we'll reestablish where they're at, compare that to what we're seeing with families, and then make adjustments to instruction.
And I know that specifically speaking of early childhood, one of the things I love the most about their action plan is that it includes family engagement as a goal. So I know that they were already in that process of, interacting with families and utilizing family support. So I know that's a part of it in early childhood. And I think that that's so positive that we were already working on those areas, because that will help in this area also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think our teachers have done a really nice job, and like an unintended or a good positive has been our ability to really work with our families in AC and provide lots of modeling on what does good guided play look like and how do we do that. So that's been a positive.
Okay. All right. So thank you for answering all of those questions. Again, I just, you look at these action plans and, for example, just even all the stuff they put in about virtual learning, all the PD, all the data that's in the plans as to the kinds of things that they're looking at, so they ensure that in every context we're making improvement. I'm just very appreciative.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, I don't see any additional questions, so we will go on in the agenda. And as a reminder, if you do have questions, I know this is a lot of information. The action for this is next time. So just if we've got those questions, go ahead and send them to the administration, and we won't have action until our next board meeting on those school improvement plans. Okay, so we'll move on to item 8.02, tax reimbursement account resolution.
Excuse me, at our last Board of Education meeting, I had indicated to the board that, based on reviewing our audit, certain budgeted expenditures for the 2019-2020 school year were lower than allowed for in the district's annual budget. Certain expenditures attributed to in-person learning were not necessary due to COVID, the district's shift to remote learning. And as a result of a number of things, we ended the year with a greater than projected revenue and less than expended expenditures. And so we had a larger than planned surplus. One of the goals of the board has been to focus on stewarding resources effectively with a commitment to providing relief to Naperville 203 taxpayers when able. And you as a board have accomplished that over recent years through abatement of debt service levy and reduction in the extension. But as a result of the unplanned surplus this year, the board is in a unique one-time position to provide additional relief to its taxpayers. And so after input from Board of Education, consultation with our CFO, CSBO, Mike Francis, we have a draft of a resolution for the board to consider, loaded into board docs, as well as a memorandum that breaks down a number of things. But what we'd recommend is that the board consider a couple one-time reimbursements. First, to designate a surplus in the amount of $10 million and to provide a one-time disbursement to owners of property within Naperville 203's taxing district, paid to the district under the most recent tax bill. We think that'll provide significant relief to our taxpayers who've taken on additional costs and been impacted by economically by the pandemic. We'd also recommend that the board consider outside of the resolution authorization to one-time reimbursement for general fees for the 2020-21 students at a cost of about $1.1 million. We recognize that as a result of at-home learning, some families have taken on additional expenses, whether it be setting up workspaces at home, additional childcare needs, recognizing that because of our position right now, we're uniquely in a place that we can provide some additional relief to our taxpayers as well as to the families of our students. In addition, as we look at surplus and we think about current state of where we're at right now and to the disruption of our in-person instruction, we have begun a process of looking at a framework that will provide a varied system of supports to assist us in our goal to maximize that learning. As we've talked again, as collaboratively, among the board, our administration, our staff, and our family and communities have really collaborated as an exemplary district to continue to ensure that we are achieving at a high level. But we know that the disruption to in-person instruction will have an impact on our students. We want to ensure that as we move forward, we have an opportunity to really kind of address that interruption to the in-person instruction. So we've begun the process of identifying different ways moving forward that we could consider providing really kind of a parent choice or menu of options, both one-time as well as maybe short-term additional costs for use of the unplanned surplus. We'll have to be cautious about things that would represent any sort of ongoing costs, but definitely some things that are one-time things like enhancements to our summer programming The list that I have provided in a memorandum for the board needs a little bit further refining, work with some of our building leaders to identify priorities and getting a sense from members of our community. For example, if we want to increase summer school opportunities, but we don't have students or families who want to take advantage of it or enough staff to support it, then obviously we have to take those things into consideration. But looking at a number of things like boot camps, learning boot camps, additional tutoring, jump starts, and thinking about how we can work on some of the social emotional things as well. So in addition to a resolution, approving that disbursement of $10 million to our taxpayers, we'd also, and then also looking at the general fee reimbursement, we'd ask the board to consider approving an expenditure of up to $5 million for additional supports to react to the impact of the reduction of in-person learning. Additionally, a later agenda item is looking at testing as one of our mitigation strategies. Moving forward, the COVID surveillance testing to assist with, again, identifying potential spread and limiting that spread as part of our mitigation to return to in-person. Initially, I'd recommended or considered recommending up to $3 million, but I think if we look right now, we'll talk about that more later, $2 million to pay for testing. That'll allow us to get every secondary level student as well as all of our staff up to 12 weeks of testing. And then finally, for future conversation, just the idea of looking at some of our ongoing capital needs. In terms of tonight's agenda, it's a discussion without action item. There's a draft of a resolution. That's the most important decision that needs to be made in the coming board meeting, is to support the recommendation for the one-time disbursement of $10 million to owners of property within Naperville 203, and that would be all property. And then ongoing conversation at a future board meeting about allocation of additional resources to support our response to the disruption of in-person instruction. Invite Mike Francis if there's any additional information. Again, these would be looked at as separate items for action at a future board meeting. You have a draft of the resolution. A more formal recommendation regarding academic programming would come at a future meeting. But for action, for sure, at the January 19th, we'd be looking for board conversation around the resolution. Mike, anything additional to add?
No, just that we would be following, this resolution follows the fiscal responsibility law. It's a statute for about 30 years old. There's only one other school district that I know of that has done something like this, taking some excess dollars and distributing back to the taxpayers. And we will be following that statute to make these disbursements if the board so acts on this resolution.
I also want to, there was an update to the draft of the resolution since it was originally posted in there. There's a recommendation for a reference to policy 420. So that has been added to the resolution as well.
Okay. Did you have any additional presentation on that?
No.
Okay. So to review, you've got the documentation included in board docs regarding specifically in response to our audit findings, but there's different action items. All of them are contained in the memo, but the one that would be for action in the next board meeting would be the taxpayer reimbursement, but then there would be future action items that will be tied to the learning loss. And then of course the testing, we also have on our agenda for action. So they're broken apart into various parts, but you know,
the memorandum is kind of an umbrella covering a number of things. The action that we're committed to looking for from the board for January 19th is the resolution that is also posted in board docs.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you for that review and questions from the board. Donna.
All right, well, I'm very excited about the possibility of us being even more, I mean, we've always been very good stewards with with our taxpayers' dollars, but to be able to do something in this day and age when everyone's struggling even more. My question is if we approve the resolution with the 10 million, dollars in it. And then as we go through the rest of your recommendations, we have some adjustments. Is there an opportunity to go back and add to the 10 million?
Yeah, I think that's going to be difficult for us to do because we are going to be under a bit of a time crunch here and a process crunch in terms of going through this process. As Mike said, this is a rarely used law. And so, Mike, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, the logistics of this are fairly complicated. We have, there'll be over 30,000 parcels receiving a distribution from the school district. And we have to work closely with the county, both Will and DuPage County clerk and or treasurer's offices to gather the needed information to process this. And that amount of processing is, for one check run is 3 or 4 times larger than we do on an annual basis. So to come back to add to this, because there's very specific dates that we need to follow. I think the best course of action would be the board to pick a value and to stick with that value so we can process appropriately.
Okay, I know at the last meeting when we were talking about this resolution, I asked the question, I think as we're getting students back into the buildings, our most important priority is to make sure that everything that's needed for the students to get back into the buildings is covered. So I appreciate entirely the tax reimbursement because that goes back to all taxpayers. I don't have an issue with that. I appreciate the fees that we're at because obviously not all of those dollars were actually used for what they were. The learning opportunities and instructional support with the summer menu, I think is outstanding because it will address some of the potential we don't even know if we have learning loss, let's be obvious. Especially after Patrick's presentation, but to be proactive and get ahead of that, I'm excited about that. And obviously the COVID surveillance testing. Guess where I get stuck is on the capital improvement planning because we already have a capital improvement plan. And so that dollar amount, and I want to hear from the rest of I'm just telling my board members where I'm at. That dollar amount to me is, without more specific details, I'd like to understand, and again, this is without action, so maybe we can get, I don't know, more details. I'd like to understand that piece before we commit to the 10 million, because potentially we could add something to that, but that's my thoughts. I'd like to hear what the rest of my board has about the rest of the board.
Yeah, if I could just respond partially to that. We have identified a number of things through our capital improvement plan that do require attention, and some of our academic and improvement goals also related to that. For example, potential expansion of Ann Reed Early Childhood Center as an example. So, I would intend for a future conversation about that. And there are some facility needs that we have throughout the district that are part of our current capital improvement plan, but are also due in the coming years to be able to update that capital improvement plan as well.
Yeah, and please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying that I don't support capital or, some of our excess dollars going to capital improvement. I'm not saying that at all. I guess I'm just, in my mind, as I'm looking at this initially, because it's the first time that we have it, I guess I'm just questioning I understand the fees are set and the COVID surveillance testing, you have a very good estimate on. The learning opportunities for the summer, you have an estimate on. So I guess to me, those three have kind of a set amount that's needed. Is it possible that we would need some more learning opportunities and instructional support the following summer? I guess is a question. And I guess the division between the tax reimbursement and the capital improvement is what I just would like to understand better what other board members are thinking.
I saw Charles's hand.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, Donna, to just first of all, I too am really delighted that we're taking a look at this and looking to be continue to be good stewards of community resources. And so I'm applauding these efforts to look at that. I'm good with the looking at capital improvements. I do think that it's important for us to, maybe through further discussion, to dive in a little bit deeper just to understand what some of those look like and some more specificity around that, to look at that relative to other things. I know that some of that work has already been done and is embedded in the memo, so I appreciate that. So Donna, that was just to answer kind of your question about wanting to know where other folks are. So that's where I am on it. I think it's some of the things Dan mentioned, like early childhood and expansion of that. I think that's definitely something that, as we anticipate future needs, is important to see if we can pull that forward as opposed to delaying it to other capital expenditures in the future. The question that I had, or I just want to just clarify, is, with everything going on, return to learn and all the things, I just want to make sure that that we just double, triple check. We feel really comfortable that the 10 million that we're looking to return back to the community, I think that's a great use of the funds. I just want to make sure that we don't, that the $10 million number is not like, oh, wow, we should have saved some of that to make sure that we have what we need to make sure that we can, continue on our path of return to learn as accelerated as possible, to make sure that we're not going to hold ourselves short. So I believe from everything that I've heard that we've looked at that. We set aside all the money that we're going to need in order to invest in those things. But if you could just confirm that for me. So we're saying that we return this 10 million. We're not going to then need to come back and say, oh, we shouldn't have given away the 10 million because we needed it for something that we need today for return to learn. Is that accurate?
Mike, you want to address that? That is accurate.
Yeah, it is accurate. We don't believe so. This would be one time. Again, these are, most of the items on the list are one-time expenditures or return of the taxpayer dollars. And it kind of relates back to the strategy of fund balance policy that the board adopted last spring, setting a range of fund balance, and then having a plan that the administration would come to them, this is part of that, to reduce that fund balance down to that acceptable range with a variety of different recommendations. This list is kind of a culmination of a lot of those recommendations put together with some relief for our families in the district, relief to the taxpayers, and also dedicating dollars towards mitigating loss of any kind of loss of learning or getting back to in-person learning. We feel it's a good combination of the assets that we have. We're in a very fortunate, strong financial position to do such a thing, and we feel that this mix of things is the right mix at this time.
Yeah, again, I would just simply add that and Mike has made this point before, we are in a unique position this year. This is not, the logistics, the challenge of going through this process is not something that we will annually find ourselves in. We happen to be, a number of forces, so to speak, colliding that provide you as a board this opportunity to do these types of things.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's important for the community to understand that these are the types of things that that this administration has been looking at and actively and proactively rather looking to do, and so I commend the recommendation. The other question I have is any sense of order of magnitude. I know that in the past we've done, and I know it's different. It's a different financial calculation, but in the past when we've done levy reductions and things like that. Or under levying, rather, is probably the more accurate way of describing it. We've been able to kind of get a range of an estimate of what that has meant to the average property owner in the district. Any opportunity to get a sense of some of that ballpark in terms of what this might mean to a owner of a certain type or level of house or something like that, just to kind of get a perspective so that folks can understand what this means.
Yeah, I've done some preliminary calculations. Again, we don't have all the data from the counties yet on all the taxing parcels, so it's impossible to give you an exact number. But I've checked this a couple different ways, and a house of around $400,000 would receive about $270 in a distribution.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. I'm good with my questions.
Oh,
I'm thrilled we're going in this direction. I support it in the biggest way. I've been fighting for this for years, and I'm thrilled that my fellow board members are finally going in that direction also. I appreciate your support. I think the $10 million number is not sufficient, nor is the fee amount. I think the fee should be closer to 3 million, and I'm willing to talk to double the number of 10 million, which I think would still leave us well within our policy regarding our reserve. I think we have a surplus in total in the tens of millions. And if we have this unique opportunity to do something for our taxpayers, I want to do the most that I can, because I don't know when we'll have this much support for doing it again.
questions from the board? Okay, I will make a couple comments. So I am also very appreciative of the long planning that has gone into this. I know that as we were heading into the pandemic, we were having those two conversations. One was about our board policy in terms of how we wanted to handle when we had a surplus, and we highlighted in specific looking at taxpayer, where we could assist taxpayers. And I think we also highlighted one-term expenses. So expenses that we could look at, whether it be educationally or capital, that would be for those one-time things. And so we put that policy in place. And I think as well, as we were heading into the pandemic, we were considering that question of whether or not we were going to abate some of our general levy. And it was very uncertain at the time because we didn't know what kinds of expenses we would have. And so I know that we went forward with our levy, but with the thought in our mind that we have these processes in place now and this policy in place, that when we have additional surplus that we didn't expect, that we would go through a process where we would have some kind of consideration that includes these kinds of things. But I think this is responsive to to that dialogue that we began, back before we even went into our pandemic learning. I think that including all of these parts of the equation are very important. So I would echo Charles's perspective in terms of making sure that we have what we need for making sure that we're able to return to learn safely. So looking at the testing and any other things that we are going to need. Now, I know, Mike, from hearing from you in the past, that you have said that we continue, even in this budget year, to have areas where we are underspending and areas where we are overspending. So I'm guessing that the answer to the question about whether or not we might have additional in this budget year as well for some of those expenses would be yes. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's very difficult to analyze and project to the end of the year, especially in a year like this. But so far we are trending behind where we were a year ago. Okay,
so we'll have additional portions of this budget that we're able to utilize besides what we've even outlined here in terms of the COVID and the safe return to learn. I also would want to ensure that as we discover our learning losses, so as we had our long discussion with school improvement plans, I would want to ensure that as we discover areas that we may not even anticipate, whether it's the standard that Dr. Knowlton mentioned that was at one school that they had a difficulty, that we're able to be nimble and respond when we see those kinds of things, when we see them, in terms of making sure that we are making our solutions fit our problems, so to speak, that we're looking at this menu and that our menu matches the needs that we uncover as we begin our testing processes and as we return to learn in person. And so I would want to ensure that both that we have the dollars for that we see, but also that if we see something in the coming year, that we also are able to respond in the coming year, besides just, when we anticipate, for example, this summer, maybe next summer too, in terms of looking at that as to just the recovery process for making sure that we are meeting our students' academic needs and also their social and emotional. And I want to make sure that our community understands that we also have social and emotional assists here as well. It isn't just looking at academic, it's all the portions that we see for student needs. So I think that part is a very important part of this as well. And in terms of looking at the future and looking at those capital needs, I kind of saw, as we were looking at this whole process, one amount that we were looking at in terms of specifically tied to our audit, where we looked at sort of that we have this taxpayer assistance, we have the fee assistance in terms of, for example, for our families that may have put together a learning space and done, maybe additional internet plans so they had more bandwidth, all those things to help recover some of those costs. And I know that to Mr. Leong's point, I know we are looking at additional fees in addition to that would be returned to our families in terms of, like, for example, if we didn't need the supplies for foods or culinary or something, that we will return those as well. So this is, looking at the general fee, but they would also have the return of those fees if they were not utilized. But I'm just wanting to ensure that we look at this in terms of the audit, but that we also continue that process of the long term, and that in our long term, looking at those reserve levels, I know we don't have to make those decisions till the end of the calendar year, from what I understand, but not the calendar, the end of the school year, but that as we look at that process, that we continue to keep some of these other buckets in mind as well. So looking always at, helping to assist taxpayers, but also looking at those educational one-time expenses that we may have on an ongoing basis, in addition to what's being proposed here. So I would be supportive of looking at, the amounts that we have here, looking at particularly the audit from last year and the unanticipated surplus that we have. But in terms of looking at what the decisions we need to make with regard to the long-term surplus, I think that we could look at all of the buckets again in looking at that long-term, kind of what we're planning to do with looking at that long-term reduction so that we ensure that our surplus meets our policy. Thoughts from other board members? Joe.
Yeah, thanks for putting this plan together. I think it's very nicely balanced. I agree with what's been said. I'm comfortable with the $10 million disbursement to taxpayers. And I think that still gives us enough to work with in terms of addressing that learning loss, providing the fee reimbursements. And I think the capital improvement planning really is important and will benefit our students as well. So that's kind of a long-term investment in the school district. So I think having that bin is really important, and I would be hesitant to dip into that bin.
Donna.
I just want to be clear that the goals that we have around stewardship and finance are goals of the whole board. And I think, like, Paul, you had said something to the effect of you've been fighting for that for years. I think that in fairness, all 7 of us have that as a goal and have been supporting all of these buckets and the movement towards this. So I think that, yes, it's exciting that we're at this point and it's a one-time opportunity, but I think we've all been fighting for that for years. So I think that that's, a fair statement to say as well. And I do agree. I want to be clear. I don't feel like capital improvement isn't important. I'm just sharing that that's my only reservation as to the amount of the buckets as far as, and then also looking towards, I think what Kristen was trying to say is are we going to have some surplus again this year that we could put into that? I think, to summarize what I think I heard her say, that we could put into that capital improvement, which is more of a long term, that will allow some maybe shift of more into the tax reimbursement. I don't know. Is that?
Well, I'm comfortable with looking at I think we had a particular amount that we had from our audit for this year that put us in a very unique spot with regard to this year, that we have looked at various buckets. So that is, basically looking at the taxpayer reimbursement, the fee reimbursement, the learning loss, and the COVID expenses. And that's about what we get at in terms of looking at our audit and, how much, additional funds we had available and looking towards that. there's also that long-term portion that we had talked about with our, with our policy. When we crafted that policy, we looked at not just if we have a one-time surplus, we were looking at overarching goals in terms of the overall amount of reserve. So I guess my perspective would be, I am comfortable with the amounts that we have for, expenditure right now. So that looking at the taxpayer and the fee, looking at the reimbursement and the fee reimbursement, and then looking at the expenditures with regard to return to learn and the expenditures with regard to learning loss, potential learning loss and recovery there, and social emotional included as a portion of that. I think capital needs is also very important. Agree, Joe, very important portion. I'm just wondering if we want to look at this in terms of a short term and a longer term, and that in our longer term we consider if there would need to be an addition for looking at additional learning loss or additional taxpayer reimbursement or some of the other areas that we're looking at short term here. Because I know we don't have to make decisions with regard to the capital portion until the end of the school year, correct? Mike, is that right in terms of when we were aiming to have our resolution with regard to the reserve?
Oh, you can commit to, there was nothing in the memo that speaks to a specific capital project. It was more of a commitment of dollars, of reserve dollars towards future capital projects. That could be done at some other time in the future. It's part of a strategy to comply with the fund balance policy and again, the unique, strong financial position that we're in, and knowing that all school districts have capital needs. Maybe not today, but we will have them tomorrow or the next day, even though we've already identified a number of things that we could do today. It's more of a strategy and a commitment by the board to dedicate some of those fund balance reserves towards capital projects moving forward. But it could be done in the future.
Right, the deadline that you were looking towards for that decision was by the end of the school year, correct?
Initially, yes, but if it doesn't happen by the end of the school year, that will be okay. We could do it at some point in the future.
Janet.
Thinking about the distribution that we're considering, the $10 million, and listening to the conversation about like if we should increase it. So I do think the part where it makes sense to keep it at 10 million is it's part of the current year surplus, which makes it it keeps it close to the taxpayers who actually paid that money, versus if we go into fund balances, then we're moving into past years where other taxpayers paid. So in that sense, this confining it to this year, to this surplus, I think makes some sense.
So agree that it's looking at that particular amount from the audit and then dispersing that portion. And then again, as we look at that overall larger amount in terms of, towards the future, we have a little bit of time, as Mr. Francis has said. And so it sounds as if in the meantime, we have more learning concerns that we want to see some one-time expenses for, we could look at that as well. So we would have a little bit more data before we make that decision if we wanted to adjust the amounts and reserve another portion for example, learning loss, look at additional fee reimbursement, for example, or taxpayer reimbursement or any other area that we felt like needed to be addressed as well as a part of that overarching dialogue with regard to the the longer term surplus goal. Oh, I'm sorry. I see Paul's hand. Sorry, Paul, I didn't see your hand before.
No worries. In terms of talking about long-term capital expenditure, one, we already have a capital plan. And two, what I've seen our district do and what other districts do is if they're running into an immediate need or for capital, I've seen us and other districts go to referendum and borrow money as needed. And we are currently paying down the debt from a previous referendum for a capital expenditure. So I think there are other tools we can use in addition to what you're talking about in terms of providing for long-term capital needs.
Donna.
So I agree that we have time, but we don't have time on the 10 million is what I'm understanding. Like that decision on the 10 million needs to be made in 2 weeks.
Correct. It's
Okay.
not right. So
Right.
like again, but I don't think that we have to preclude ourselves from ever doing something that is taxpayer assistance. You know, this is time bound because it's due to the looking at the audit and, tying it to the particular taxpayers who.
Well, but I don't know if I agree, because I feel like there's a lot of work from what I'm hearing from Mike, and from Dan, is that there's a lot of work that goes into cutting 30,000 checks, which is more than we normally cut in a year. So I'm not thinking, that's why I'm saying this is and I've heard them say this is a one-time, like we're in a unique situation for a one-time situation. So I guess I would be okay with the 10 million if we're, and again, this isn't the conversation we're having now, but if we're talking about reducing the levy or something before March, then I'd be okay with the 10 million because we'd be able to do something different for the taxpayer then. But the reimbursement that we're talking about is not something that we're gonna be able to pull off year after year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I really think that we need to think about the 10 million and in the back of our heads, think about the tax levy, which is not this discussion, but it ties into it as far as what we can do to be good financial stewards with our taxpayers' dollars. So that's why I bring up the 10 million now.
What is the timing for the that must be done, Mike? Is there one? Because it's not like the regular levy discussions where we have that.
No, this can be done again at another time also. But I believe I'm not sure who said it, but tying it to number one, the results of last year, and number two, getting it as close, because it has to be done on a proportional basis to the most recent tax bills. The farther you get away from that, the more turnover you're going to have in those properties, and it just makes the process more difficult. So we're trying to do this in an expeditiously as possible to get the dollars, as many of the dollars, into the hands of the people that actually paid those dollars.
And again, the recommended number comes, again, I would just say, just the unanticipated, the unplanned surplus that we had. I mean, that's how we get to this number.
Okay, so do we have any additional questions or comments for board members? Okay, so I think the administration is proposing going forward with the 10 million and including these additional spending, which ties to our audit, and then looking long-term at some capital expenses, an amount which can be determined by the board and does not have to be the amount that's in this memo, or could be, lesser or more, and is, they were hopeful to have done by the end of the year, by the end of the school year. So I think
I think Mike, and Mike maybe help me if I can, just so that we make sure we're clear on by the end of the year. Any adjustment that gets made to the budget, we have to go through a process before the end of the fiscal year. In terms of if we choose not to make a decision, I mean, that can be done in any. Mike, is that correct?
Yeah, these decisions are going to have a ripple effect on a number of different processes that we have. One will be, not only are we going to have just started as of the last board meeting processing next year's budget, we'll have to amend this year's budget for a number of these items. So that's a process, and that process probably will happen towards the end of the year. So as many of these things that we know or the board takes action on or decides on, they will have an effect on how we process those other things as we move forward. So like the capital item doesn't have to be done, but to the extent that we know about it and we can plan for it, we can incorporate it into some of the other planning that needs to get done and brought back in front of the board before the end of the fiscal year.
Paul.
Regarding this idea of paying back in this year what you paid in, I would still estimate that per $1,000 home, and we gave you back 200. If we doubled it, I still think you paid in more than 200. So I think if we paid you back 400, I still think you'd have paid in more than 400. I don't think we're getting into a weird situation where we're giving you back more tax than you paid in. And I think, again, everyone paid in substantially more than 200. So if we were to increase the payment, regardless of when you think we accumulated the surplus, I don't think it would be horrible. I don't think this is unique or one-time situation, because in my 4 years, we've had massive surplus all 4 years.
Okay, so trying to figure out how to move forward here. We could look at, do we want to look at the overarching, policy that we're getting at here, which is looking at our surplus and our reserve and ensuring that we meet our policy with regard to what percent we want, and then looking at that our overall amount. We could revisit this dialogue in terms of, allocating differently to the various buckets, or we could consider here's what we're going to do with regard to this year, and we will revisit the other discussion about the overarching reserve policy and the buckets for that in the future. Not meaning that we do something like this every year, but that we take this one particular portion, which has to do with our, audit that we just got back, and dispense with that, and then look at the longer term question and make any considerations for that, which could potentially include something of the kind in the future towards taxpayers. And so making it a two-time thing, not a one-time thing. Or we could look at, do we want to look at the amounts and sort of combine it all together right now?
So I provided the Board of Education with a memorandum that was, as I indicated at the beginning, more of an umbrella, kind of saying to help kind of put into perspective for you, to a question that was asked earlier by Mr. Cush. One of the first questions asked, can we handle this? Can we do this? Are we okay with this? That there are other areas of need that we have identified, is in response to the disruption to in-person instruction, the need for testing, which, I anticipate board action very soon. So that'll commit some money. And so they don't all have, they are so interrelated, but they are not one requirement of the other, so to speak. My recommendation would be that as we go into next board meeting, we break them out differently, and so that the resolution itself is standalone. And my recommendation is the $10 million. So the resolution I would intend to bring would be that resolution intent, and then we can have the discussion about modifying it or whatever at the next board meeting, if that's the board's wish. Further work with our building leaders and instructional leadership teams at the site base regarding these recommendations that we have to assist with programming, or what are some things that we miss, what are some other ideas that we have, what that need may be. For capital, let's just set that aside for now. Granted, you're going to want to look at, we have capital needs and we are going to have ongoing capital needs. We already spend at least $6 million on building modifications, building improvements, mechanical, electrical, plumbing every year. So we know we have those ongoing. We also know an investment in our facilities, when we are able to, prevents emergency unplanned expenses down the road that we may or may not be able to afford. Okay, and so I think we can look at those separately. So if we kind of break it out, we can kind of, in part of our conversation at the next meeting, maybe can involve all of them, look at them as separate, different action items.
Sound good to everyone? Great. I see head nods. Since we're on virtual context, I will report for the people who are I see head nods. So it looks like we have some agreement there. And so we'll break these apart and we'll perhaps postpone, but we'll look at all this as an interrelated thing, but with some areas where are time bound and others that we're going to give ourselves a little more time. So thank you for that. And thank you, Charles.
Hold on. You had me until you said we'll postpone. My understanding is that we weren't taking action on this particular one.
Correct. We're not taking action on it tonight. Sorry. I just meant with regard to what I think that Superintendent Bridges had said with capital discussion, we would, not have that exact, that part is what I talk about postponing. I'm sorry. No, none of this was for action tonight. This is just in terms of the overall discussion that we will postpone some of those decisions for the future and that we'll look at this again next week or next board meeting. Sorry.
Okay. Just clarifying the postponing.
Yep, it's without action. We're not postponing a vote. Correct.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. So we'll move on to item 8.03, second reading policies 7.310, restrictions on publications.
In January of last year, administration brought to the Board of Education recommendation for an update to policy 7310. You had some input from the Board of Education members and then contact from some of our student journalists at both of our schools for suggestions. And so staff incorporated those things into it. I'll turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Ed, Stephanie Posey, to kind of update the board where you're at. We'll also call the community's attention. We have updated our post here. The item has been on the agenda, but we posted one without some modifications to it. And so we now have the correct one in there. Stephanie, go ahead and talk a little bit about this policy.
Sure, thank you very much. As you'll see, what's attached in the board docs is a reflection of changes to the board policy that incorporates both some feedback from press, our legal team, our students, and some of our staff, as well as the Board of Education. Given that this was tabled for a while because of the pandemic, we thought it'd be prudent to give you an additional time to discuss without action, as well as be able to take additional feedback should there be any before we recommend action at the next board meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you for that review. I know that this was on our agenda right before we went into the pandemic. And so we appreciate the review. I know that we had received some comments in terms of concerns. Can you speak to, the incorporation of that and the process for that in terms of making sure that we hear the feedback from our student journalists?
Yeah, I'll let Stephanie talk about it. If I can just go real quick. Sure. Yeah, the comments that we had also were with, that's kind of one of the things that brought to attention that perhaps we had the wrong thing posted. So I know. Stephanie, go ahead.
Thanks.
Right. So some of the things that you'll see in that letter that was in public comment have actually been addressed in the revised document that you've received this evening. But I will follow up with both schools just to ensure that they have adequate feedback time for us.
Great. I do see some of that, like for example, the protected speech is definitely, it does look like that's included in the policy. The policy name though, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have the policy name be more positive as suggested in the letter, that I don't know if we're just going with the press names or something, but I know that that was specifically called out as something that felt negative as opposed to positive. And I can see that based on, restrictions on publications as opposed to student publications.
I do believe that was recommended by press, but I will look into it.
Yeah. So, but even if press recommends a name to be that and everybody else's is called that, we could certainly rename ours if it feels more positive towards our journalists. So just my perspective. But I will appreciate hearing of the meetings and any feedback. And obviously if there's feedback or changes that come from that and we need to push make additional changes and push forward, we could definitely do that. Other questions or comments from board members? Donna.
So I know that we had 2 students come and speak to us approximately a year ago in regard to this before COVID. So I guess and I know that you've said, Stephanie, that you've collaborated with the high schools. I guess I want to make sure that we've gone back to their public comment and made sure that we addressed their concerns, because I think they lived in that environment for 4 years. I think they were both seniors at the time. So if we could go back and I'd like to understand what, how we've addressed their concerns. Not that we necessarily are going to, have to meet every one of their concerns, but if we didn't, I want to understand why we didn't as well. So I just want to go back to that. Typically, we don't have the huge gap that we had in responding. So if we could get a little more detail on student concerns that were addressed and ones that weren't based on public comment, that would be helpful. Thank you.
My plan is that between the two editors last year who are now since graduated brought approximately 8 overlapping concerns to the table, and I will take those back and ensure that the new editors as well as the advisors feel that we, if we are able to, we can address those.
Great. And I also would second Kristen's response to the title. If we could come up with something in a more positive way, manner, I would appreciate that too. Thank you.
And the process you've outlined sounds perfect, especially with understanding that we're overlapping, editors from before and editors from now, getting them all included and, all the feedback. Thank you for that. Additional questions or comments from the board? Okay, I don't see any. So we will go on then in our agenda to discussion with action. And our discussion with action is item 9.01, agreement with Safeguard Surveillance, LLC.
As indicated at the December 21st Board of Education meeting, we were exploring and negotiating with a company to be able to offer weekly screening tests for COVID-19 for all staff and secondary level students. And the goal of that program is that early identification of potential COVID cases to help reduce transmission of the virus in quarantines due to close contact, especially from some more asymptomatic individuals. Attached into board docs, and again, this came in Sunday evening or late afternoon. It has been reviewed by our legal counsel. It is consistent with other districts who have engaged with this company. It does incorporate recommendations for modification or change that were offered by the legal counsel. We still have some work to do with the company in terms of actual final numbers in terms of our testing. So what I'm asking, again, the contract is there provided for you. We've had multiple conversations on this and board input. The action I'd be asking for is authorization for the superintendent to execute an agreement with Safeguard Surveillance LLC in an amount not to exceed $2 million initially. What that would ensure that we are able to do is provide 12 weeks of weekly testing for every secondary grade 6 through 12 student, as well as all staff for the next 12 weeks. And at that point, we would evaluate in terms of where we are with vaccine distribution, efficacy. The actual cost will be far less than that $2 million. We'll spend some time, again, going through the logistics of kind of how often, who will test, when we'll test, how it's going to happen. And again, seeing, if we target the 70% of our 70% in person, again, that number is going to be well below that $2 million. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
And I know we had several questions about this already, but questions from the board. Charles, I think you said you had more questions. Do you have more questions?
The only question I would ask is, did we look at other organizations for alternatives, et cetera, to competitively kind of bid this out? Or is this pretty much the only group that offers this at this time? Or just if you could speak to that process a little bit.
Very limited in what's available in terms of this type of surveillance testing. One of the benefits I think of this is it is a more local company. So the turnaround is going to be, again, it'll be quick for our turnaround within 24 hours, which again is important for the spread. It's just unfortunately we don't have a lot of options. I highly recommended from some of the other districts that have partnered with them.
And I think as well, there were other tests that I know are not available. So looking, for example, at the U of I testing, which I know we're not able to do because we don't have the lab that they require, but that testing was a lot more expensive.
Again, yeah, it's surveillance. It's not, there's certain regulations or requirements by the FDA and others that are not necessary in this because of the type of testing that we're doing.
Paul.
I think this is a great step for making return to school and return to learn safer for all students. Thanks so much for putting it together.
Okay.
Other questions? And I know a lot of us expressed our support and questions as a part of the earlier return to learn discussion, but if there are additional questions, I don't see anyone's hands. So if not, I'll take them. Oh, sorry, Donna, sorry.
At what point will we start those then?
Ideally, we're going to start at the week of the 25th. I think that's still a manageable goal, but we're going to have to move quickly.
Okay.
So we would be envisioning that we would start this before, like for the people that are the 6 through 12 that would be going in. So it might have to ramp up that like the week before, correct?
We'll try.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Charles.
I was going to make the motion, but
go right ahead.
I move approval of item 9.01 agreement with Safeguard Surveillance LLC as presented.
If you can, just for the record, in that motion, in an amount not to exceed $2 million, so you put a little limit on me.
Okay, limiting Dan. Got it. Okay, so I move approval of item 9.01 agreement with Safeguard Surveillance LLC not to exceed $2 million.
Authorizing our superintendent to act in the right because we wanted that part too.
Our superintendent to act in an amount not to exceed $2 million.
Okay, great.
Wong-Key, second.
Motion and second are heard. Please call the roll, Mrs. Patton.
Leong.
Aye.
Kosminski. Kosminski.
Aye.
Wong-Key.
Aye.
Kush.
Aye.
Gerke.
Aye.
Yangrohr.
Aye.
Fitzgerald.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes. So we will move on in our agenda to item 10, old business. We do not have any old business to discuss. So we'll move to item 11, new business. Janet?
Yes, I have one item of new business. So next Wednesday, January 13th, I will be sworn in as an Illinois State Representative into the 102nd General Assembly. So I wanted to let this board know that I intend to submit my resignation on January 12th ahead of my taking that state representative office. You know, it's been an absolute honor and privilege to serve on this board, and you know, for a school district that my husband and I and so many of our family members and friends also attended. And this school's district, you know, it really helped us build a rock solid foundation for our lives and our careers. And we've been so lucky to now have our 3 kids attend many of the same schools that we did, you know, a few decades prior. So, you know, this, as I know everyone knows, this board and this administration will have just an incredibly important and difficult work ahead of them, and I'm so grateful that it is this group being entrusted to make those hard decisions for my kids and for this community. And I just want you all to know the dedication I've seen from all of you has been absolutely inspiring, and the work that we do here and the mission that we have in District 203, it will be, please know that it will be one of the brightest guiding lights for me when I represent our community in Springfield. So thank you all so much for the opportunity to serve. Thank you to the community for entrusting me in the stewardship of our schools these past few years. And I know that our schools and our students remain in very good hands. So thank you.
Janet, thank you so much for your service. We're so, we congratulate you on your new endeavor, and we want you to know how much you will be missed here. On behalf of the whole board, we want to thank you for all that you have brought during your 3.5, almost 4 years here on the board. The fact that you brought the perspective of being an alumni, all your expertise financially, your work with young, the fact that you have young students, and you've just brought so much, and we want to thank you so much for your service and tell you how much you'll be missed. We so appreciate, however, that we'll be able to continue to work with you. And so we're looking forward as a board to working with you as you represent us in Springfield. And we know that you'll bring all of the experience that you gained here to your work there. And so we're looking forward to continuing our work with you. Okay, I know that I see some claps. And so I just want, I know that our whole board shares those sentiments.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, Janet, I want to say thank you also for your service to the community and to the school district. I wish you well and look forward to you representing this community and school district in Springfield, and hope we continue to have a very collegial and very professional, positive relationship, and look forward to your advocacy on our behalf. Now, that being said, one of my responsibilities is to share with the board and the community the process for moving forward. So just members of the community we had questions that came up during public comment as well. The election code, school code, and Illinois case law actually provide that a written resignation creates a vacancy as soon as it's filed with the board. In anticipation of Janet filing that next week on the 12th, we will have a vacancy. And when a vacancy occurs on the Board of Education, we are bound by time in terms of filling that. So the initial first step will be a notification to the regional superintendent of a vacancy. We'll have to do that within 5 days of the notice of the resignation. And then we need to begin, the board will begin the process of posting and filling that vacancy, who will then serve the unexpired amount of Janet's term. So that seat will then be up for election in 2023. And the board will have 45 days from the time the resignation is received to fill that seat. If the board is unable to do so, then the regional superintendent has 30 days to fill that seat. But I have every confidence we have experience doing this and filling that seat that we will have. So upon receipt of Janet's resignation, we'll make notification to the Regional Office of Education and the regional superintendent, and then we'll post that vacancy. Open Meetings Act does allow the board to be able to conduct those interviews in closed session. Just for those who may be interested, again, qualifications are the same qualifications if one were running. On the time of appointment, must be a U.S. citizen, at least 18 years of age, a resident of Illinois in the district for at least 1 year preceding the appointment, and a registered voter. So we'll have additional information that we'll post and share with the community in the future.
Thank you, Superintendent Bridges, for outlining that. I know that in the past we have done public notification as well, so that as soon as those timeframes are established, we'll send out a communication so that any interested person is aware, knows the timeframes, et cetera. Correct?
That's correct.
Right. So we'll continue that process. So, okay, so thank you for outlining that, and again, thank you to Janet for your wonderful collaboration over the past time that you've been here, and we look forward to continued collaboration and friendship with you in your new spot. Okay, so any other new business? Okay, so then we will go on to item 12 in our agenda. Item 12 is upcoming events.
I'll just highlight that our next Board of Education meeting is actually on Tuesday, January 19th, as a result of the Martin Luther King holiday. So next meeting is January 19th. Again, week of January 25th, we plan to transition to stage 3, hybrid learning of our return to learn plan.
And we have coming up on the 6th, the first day of school back, correct, too, just for our students who may have forgotten. Okay, any other things that people want to highlight in terms of the schedule? All right, so then we will move on to item 13, adjournment. Item 1301, motion to adjourn, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. Yang Roar.
Second.
A motion and a second are heard. Please call the roll, Mrs. Patton.
Leong,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Wanke,
Aye.
Yang Roar,
Aye.
Gerke,
Aye.
Kush,
Aye.
Kuzminski.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. We are adjourned. Good night, everyone.